I can't believe you ate the entire chunk. If you wanted some you should have grabbed it before we left. No, I did not want your disgusting floor sushi. Buzzer seemed to have a real problem with me eating the tentacle piece. I was a bit worried about it at first, but Pebbles just laughed when he found out, and Ifrit didn't have any real reaction that I could detect. She was silent as usual, and with her facial features hidden by the mask it was rather difficult to tell what she might be thinking. I wish humans used pheromones, it would simplify things. Sure, they produced smells, but only 2 or 3 seemed to mean anything, and they tended to be redundant. Like broadcasting fear while they died. Of course dying is scary. What was the point of broadcasting it to the organism killing you? It would kind of make sense if other humans could pick up the scent and avoid the area afterwards, but so far the only human with the proper equipment had been the tracker human. So odd. Either way, eating the tentacle had been worth Buzzer's complaints. Both the design and codes were unique in comparison to other organisms I had eaten, and I already had several ideas on how to utilize what I learned from it. Shame I couldn't eat the entire corpse, but as far as I could discern the creature's size was due to a trigger event, not a random product of Mutavis, and I should be able to acquire fresh samples of the original organism later. Gregor and Olsen met up with us, and Pebbles led us back to the van. Apparently Buzzer's contact had given him the location of an Espada safe house, and Pebbles wanted to scope the place out. We piled in the van and headed out. Pebbles drove a few blocks south of Ashwood St, and then west again, into what my map said was E12. Just so you guys know, if you get lost your masks won't be able to help you here, said Pebbles. They only have map functions in E13. You'll have to get at least within 3 blocks of the border. I was under the impression we would not be seeking trouble, replied Gregor. Course not, but you never know, right? We're just gonna take a look-see, and if we see anything juicy we'll call in a cowl, Pebbles replied. I thought the map function had to be approved by a lieutenant, I interjected. What gave you that idea? Imp said so. He had to give me the directions to the safe house on the last job. Kid, that's just for sending important info over the network, you never know when a technopath is listening in, said Buzzer. If you want to use the map function just give your mask the address and it'll lead you there. I wish I'd known that sooner. So, it uses GPS. God no! Cried Buzzer. The map's inbuilt to the mask. Uses GPS. Can you imagine? Might as well paint a target on your back and shoot off flares for any passing hero to follow. I clicked the GPS feature on my phone off. Don't mind him, Tofu, we haven't had a technopath in this sector in years, Buzzer's just paranoid, said Pebbles. It's my job to be paranoid. We'll see how you feel when the heroes show up on your doorstep. Grumbled Buzzer. We didn't go very far into E12. Buzzer directed Pebbles for a few blocks, and then Pebbles pulled into an alley about a block from our destination, a 7-story apartment building. Buzzer rolled down a window before saying, "All right chumps, quiet down for a bit," and he stuck his hand out the window. We waited in silence for a few minutes, until Pebbles asked, "Anything?" This was interesting, Buzzer could hear all that from a block away. "All right. I'll send in confirmation and see how the brass wanna handle this," said Pebbles. Pebbles used his mask to send a message, then after a minute turned to us and said, "Okay, seems most of our cowls are tied up right now, so we gotta wait and watch till one can come round." "Wonderful, just how I wanted to spend my day," said Buzzer. Stuff a sock in it and keep your ears open." To pass the time I decided to try playing Griblin Tamer on my phone with the sound off. I fiddled with the opening options and managed to get my Griblin to level 2 before I was interrupted. Shit, said Buzzer suddenly. "What is it?" asked Pebbles. Car just pulled up outside the apartment and I recognized the voices. One of them is Frankie, and it looks like they've got Jasper in the car. "What? Are you sure?" "Yeah, Heartbeat is a mutant, and I can hear Jasper's stupid fake accent even through whatever's gagging him." "Well shit, that's not good. Let me send a message to base." What's not good mind filling us in? Asked Gregor. It's Jasper, an information broker who works in E13, answered Buzzer. He works with us all the time, helped set up the barbecue on Sunday in fact. I don't know how the Espada caught him, but they hate his guts. They'll make him talk and then they'll kill him regardless of what he says. No, I couldn't have that. Jasper's information was too valuable, and he was my backup plan in case I ever needed to disappear and get a new job. Then we should go help him, I said. Easier said than done, said Buzzer. Pebbles, did they reply yet? Yeah, seems the closest cowl is about an hour out. A whole hour from what I remembered of Jasper's previous encounter with Frankie. I wasn't sure he'd last the whole hour in the condition I wanted him in. Frankie hadn't seemed like the patient type. I don't think Jasper will last a whole hour. Yeah, probably not, said Pebbles, and he started to drum his fingers on the steering wheel. Pebbles, you aren't actually thinking of going in without a cowl, are you? Asked Buzzer. Well, the way I see it, we're up against 20 or so goons and Frankie. Any two of us could handle most of the goons, the only problem is Frankie. What's Frankie's power? Asked Gregor. I answered, he makes blades appear over his forearms, they can cut through metal easily. Oh, you've seen him before? Asked Pebbles. And fought him. I helped Jasper on the subway when Frankie found him. He won't be a problem for me. Ha! You sure get around Tofu. Alright, that means between Tofu and Olsen we got two people who can take him without losing an arm. Buzzer spoke. Pebbles, even if we can storm the place, they'll just slit Jasper's throat to spite us the moment we show our faces. Unless we can get to Jasper quietly, there's no point to this. The van fell into silence at that. Apparently none of them were good at stealth. I think I can get to him. I'm a shapeshifter. 5 minion masks turned to me. Ugh, I really didn't like when groups looked at me all at once like that. What's your plan? I jumped to the roof from the next door apartment, and come in from the top. If Buzzer can guide me, I'm reasonably sure I can get to Jasper. Well, that might work, but if I send you in alone, Sandra will tear me a new one. I could bring someone, it's not a hard jump. There was silence for a moment as they considered my plan. Then Olsen spoke up, I can go with him, Pebbles. If shit hits the fan, it's not like I'll die. Ha. Alright then. How about this? Tofu and Olsen come in from the top. Grab Jasper. And we'll make a ruckus to cover their escape. What if they have any hidden supers? Or if the heroes show up? Asked Gregor. And the civilians in the building, said Ifrit. Almost whispering. Those would all be problems even with a cowl. Right now the biggest problem is how long Jasper can last with Frankie and a bunch of pissed off gangers. Replied Pebbles. Gregor and Ifrit took a moment to consider. Then Gregor shrugged. As long as Frankie gets handled. Getting paid to beat up a bunch of mutant haters is fine with me. Ditto. Said Ifrit simply. Ha. One of the perks of the job for sure. Alright. Looks like we are a go. Buzzer sighed before saying. Make sure your masks are set to channel 3. And went back to sticking his hand out the window. Olsen and I exited the van. And walked further down the alley until we reached the fire escape. I reached up and pulled down the ladder for Olsen. Then we made our way up to the roof. We moved to the edge carefully. Trying to stay out of line of sight of the windows in the apartment across from us. You sure you can jump us to the other side? Asked Olsen. Yes. I've done this before. No worries. I won't drop you. Not me I'm worried about. If we plummet to the street, I somehow doubt we'll get a second chance. I went about locking my legs into the jumping position. Then I had him climb onto my back and hold on. Once he was settled, I took a few running steps and launched us across the alley to the neighboring roof. I landed easily. My practice the night before paying off. I let Olsen down. Snapped my legs back to normal. And we walked over to the maintenance door that would lead us down. "Can you two hear me?" came Buzzer's voice suddenly. "This must be the shortwave." "Yeah, we can hear you, Buzzer," said Olsen. "Good. There's no one on the top floor near as I can tell. There's a couple people in apartments. But I think most of the Espada are on the 3rd floor. That's where they took Jasper." The roof door was locked. But it was flimsy. And it was easy to carve around the door handle. "Neat trick," mentioned Olsen. It was. But it would be better if I could pick the locks without damaging them. Another reason I would like Jasper undamaged. Maybe if we saved him he would teach me how he did it. "Say. How thick of a wall could you carve through?" I haven't really tested it." "Why?" "Heh. If you can get through at least a foot or so I might have an idea." We made our way down a few flights of stairs. Slowly and quietly. But stopped when we got to the 4th floor. Then Olsen radioed Buzzer again. And asked him to lead us to a spot above the room where they were keeping Jasper. Down a few halls we came to the apartment Buzzer specified. A room. 4F. Buzzer confirmed that it was empty and I opened the door by carving around the lock again. Inside was a lot like what I had seen the time I busted through apartments trying to get away from Magenta. Filled with furniture and other various knickknacks that humans collected. Although this one was better organized than the examples I had seen thus far. Olsen led us to a room where one piece of furniture dominated the space. A rectangular contraption holding an equally large rectangular cushion and covered in rectangular sheets. With a rectangular pillow near the wall. From the indent in the cushion it was obvious that the owner of the apartment spent a lot of time here. Probably sleeping during its rest cycle. Seriously now. I know humans like rectangles. But this was just taking it too far. "We above Jasper?" Buzzer asked Olsen. Olsen turned to me. "Well, Tofu, think you can carve through the floor in here?" I bent down and placed my hand on the floor. And set my micro units towards burrowing a test run. The floor was covered in carpet. And below that it was made of the same concrete that made up most of the city. Along with a few miscellaneous support materials. The spike of micro units I sent into the floor descended steadily. Until it broke into the room below. I was careful to not let any dust fall from the small hole I made. I couldn't make a true eye since I didn't want them to notice. But a simple light detector was easy enough. And I used it to get a general layout of the room. Sure enough. I made out the shape of a green humanoid in a chair that must be Jasper. And 2 other humanoid shapes that must be the gangers Buzzer mentioned. It looks like I can tunnel through the floor just fine. "Is there a spot you want me to open the hole?" I asked Olsen. "Close to the door so we can try to block it. Bonus points if you can nail one of the guards with the rubble." I plugged the tiny hole I bored. And had Olsen help me move the bed quietly away from the wall since it was in the way. Then I went about carving the hole. It was slower going than the glass wall had been back at the test chamber. The materials of the floor weren't uniform. And concrete itself was a blend of different materials. Which forced me to use a variety of different micro-unit structures to deal with it. Not to mention I had to maintain structural integrity while I did this. It would be disastrous if the section of floor fell before it was big enough to let us through. Deconstructing inorganic materials was simple enough. But reconstructing them painfully difficult. The micro-units attached to anything I tried to make, and if I didn't keep them connected to my core they would self-destruct. I wound up just brute forcing it by holding parts of the section together with temporary fleshy constructs. Despite the difficulties I was making decent time. Right up until... Zap! I cut through a metal piece that was apparently a wire charged with electricity. The electric current carried along a large section of micro-units and fried them. The ones that weren't destroyed instantly self-destructed a second later. I rushed to repair the damage before anything fell. Guys, came Buzzer's voice over the radio. Something just happened. The Espada in Jasper's room are complaining that their lights went out. Did something happen? I hit a wire. I replied. Well, hurry it up then. They think it's the bulb for now. But not all of them are stupid. Olsen turned to me. How close are you? About 3/4 of the way. Any way to speed this up? Sugar. If you can find it. Olsen nodded and walked out of the room to find me more fuel. And I sped up my deconstruction of the floor. No longer bothering to properly exchange micro-units and instead just discarding them along with the floor material. I burned fuel to keep micro-unit production and transportation at a maximum. Olsen came back then with several food items. But one of them turned out to be a bag of raw sugar. With my free hand I grabbed it and started to pour the contents into my mouth. Jesus dude. I hope you're immune to diabetes. Humans have too many hang-ups about food. Guys. I hate to break up the party, but Frankie is sending chumps out to check the building and he's talking about moving Jasper. It's now or never. Said Buzzer. I burned fuel fast. And dumped some sugar straight into the crevice I had carved just to get it to the micro-units faster. Almost done. Get ready to jump in. Alright. I'll go in first to draw their attention. You get to Jasper and untie him. Oh. I wish he had said that before I triggered the micro-units. The fleshy constructs I had made self-destructed. And the circular section of floor I was standing on fell through into the room below. With me on it. One human was crushed under the rubble. And once my footing was stable I lashed out my arm and slammed a knife into the neck of the other guard. Making sure to open an artery. I heard multiple shouts from outside the room as they heard the crash. And a quick glance at the door showed that luckily it was the kind that swung inward. Which meant the rubble was blocking it. The only light in the room was from a dirty window. Olsen jumped down after me and started piling more rubble and furniture by the door. Which multiple Espada were pounding on. I moved to Jasper to untie him. Well. Could have done with a bit more warning. But hey. At least you got the bonus points. Said Olsen. I moved to Jasper. They had put a blindfold and a heavy gag on him. And I pulled them off. Please don't kill me. I'll tell you anything you want. Yelled Jasper the moment I had the gag off him. Glad to see you haven't changed, Jasper. Said Olsen. Jasper gazed around blearily before his eyes focused on us. I could understand his confusion. Two of his eyes were closed and appeared to be somewhat swollen. With the chitin around a third one cracked and leaking. Well, I'll be. Is that you, Olsen? I heard you were back in the game. And Hellions' henchman came to save me. Why? I knew I could count on Hellion to look out for a friend. Did you know me and her go way back? All the way to save the Spiel, Jasper. It's nice to see you too. But this isn't the right location for reminiscing. Air. Right. Quite right. Ah. Thank you, my good man. Jasper said as I released the last of the ropes binding him. I met you on the subway. My name's Tofu. Thank you for the job information. It worked out quite well. On the subway, OH. The kid. And here you are saving me again. Such a small world. Guys. Focus. Get Jasper up through the hole. Olsen didn't get to finish his sentence. Because just then a glowing green blade punctured right through the door. Propped up furniture. And Olsen's chest. Killing him instantly. Then Olsen grabbed a nearby chair and tried to prop it over the door. But a second green blade slashed through and took off his head. Killing him instantly. After that failed. Olsen resorted to just hucking pieces of rubble through the opening Frankie was making in the barricade. "Now's a good time to start moving, guys," said Olsen. Error. Processing. Error. I pulled my gaze away from Olsen and started helping Jasper to the hole we had made in the ceiling. Every time Olsen did whatever he was doing, it threw my calculations out of order. It was very confusing. And I really wanted to know how he was doing that. I locked my legs for jumping. Then used them and my arms to boost Jasper up and out of the hole I had made. Then once I was through myself, I reached down to pull Olsen out as well. Olsen, how did you do that? It's my power. Escape now. Explain later. Good point. We exited the apartment and hurried down the hallway heading towards the stairway. But before we got there, a large group of humans rounded the corner. Saw us. And one immediately pulled out a gun and started firing. Olsen and I stepped in front of Jasper to provide cover. Several bullets hit me. But none of them penetrated the suit. It really worked. Back down the hall. There should be a second stairwell. Yo, Buzzer. How's that distractionary ruckus coming along? Yelled Olsen. We started running back down the hallway, and after a few seconds Buzzer responded. Yeah. About that. A second car showed up. Did you know Sanguine is still alive? I didn't. Buzzer, if you're joking, I swear to God. I'm not. I don't know how that fossil survived the barbecue. But he's outside the building. Ifrit is throwing fireballs at him. But she'll be out of juice soon and the rest of us can't get close. Who is Sanguine? I asked. He's one of the Espada's leaders and he can control blood. All he has to do is cut you. And if you're in range, he bleeds you dry. Explained Olsen as we ran. Unfortunately, that means I'm a liability now. If I get cut, he'll just have an infinite blood supply. Well, that wasn't good. We rounded a corner and came into sight of the second stairwell. Unfortunately, we heard more humans coming up this one as well. The roof. As long as you can get Jasper safely over to the next building, we should be fine, said Olsen. We started running up the stairs. But Jasper started to lag behind from his injuries. And I had to carry him piggyback like I did with Olsen. Using the jumping configuration of my legs to make climbing the stairs with him easier. We made better time this way. And we got to the 7th floor when Olsen rounded the next bend and a glowing green blade took him in the gut. Olsen staggered. And Frankie kicked him, knocking him back down the stairs towards me. I caught Olsen. And back down the stairs so I could drop both Olsen and Jasper on the landing. Olsen was wheezing and bleeding badly. Why wasn't his power working? How'd you get ahead of us? Frankie laughed. And some of the goons chuckled. It's called an elevator, idiot. If you're not gonna use your brain, how about I get rid of it for you? Just hold still and try not to bleed on my jacket. Of course. A building this size would undoubtedly have an elevator somewhere. I felt a bit embarrassed that I hadn't thought of it myself. Frankie started to descend the stairs with his blades out. He probably should have waited until the goons behind us caught up and surrounded us, however. Stairs aren't very good footing for a fight. Increasing reaction speed to 200%. 60-second burn. When he got close enough, I snapped an arm out and grabbed his foot, yanking it out from under him. He cursed and tried to swing at me as he fell. But with my other hand I grabbed his wrist away from the blade. And when he swung with the other arm, I released his foot and grabbed that arm too. Then I pressed a foot into his chest to knock some of the air out of him and get him to stop struggling. This was so much easier when I wasn't half starved. Back up or he dies, I said to his approaching goons. And I slid a knife out of my foot to poke Frankie in the neck. They stopped and hesitated, unsure whether it was worth charging me anyways. Back up you morons, yelled Frankie. And this time they did. Now what to do about Olsen? Whatever Jasper was doing looked like it was only making it worse. And Olsen was struggling and trying to say something unsuccessfully with his injured diaphragm. I clicked the switch in my mask and radioed Buzzer. "Hey Buzzer, do you know why Olsen's power would stop working?" "What, is he dead?" "No. But he's bleeding out and I don't know how to help him." Satan's icy tits. This is why I hate training runs. Just kill him. He can't reset if he doesn't die. And hurry up. Ifrit ran out of juice and we need to leave. Oh. I guess that made sense with what I had seen. I dragged Frankie over to Olsen and stabbed him with one of the blades Frankie had yet to disperse. Instantly Olsen was back on his feet and completely okay. Error. Damn, that was hard to watch. Even when I knew it was coming. Ugh. Finally. "Jasper, what the hell, you know how this works?" complained Olsen. I was trying. Not everyone is good at violence. I'm a businessman. Not some common thug. Jesus. Come on. We need to hurry. The rest of the Espada caught up. But using Frankie as a hostage, we were able to make our way to the top floor. Frankie muttering curses the entire way while I poked at him with the knife. As we reached the final landing before the roof access, we heard an almost innocuous ding. Down the hallway opposite the stairwell, an elevator I hadn't noticed when we first came through opened up. Inside was a human. And it was shriveled. It was hunched over and using a stick to help move. Its skin was wrinkled and what little hair it had was gray and stringy. Maybe it was sick, but the glare it gave us was very much alive. And the small floating cloud of red liquid around it meant this must be Sanguine. Estimated threat, high. Stay back. Or I'll kill Frankie. Sanguine just sneered and shuffled forward. Apparently he didn't value Frankie as much as his underlings did. "Hey Tofu," said Olsen. "Since Sanguine is up here, I'm gonna go jump off the roof. I don't want to risk him catching me. Will you be fine?" "Yeah. I can toss Frankie and then jump Jasper over," I replied. Unfortunately, I couldn't just get Frankie and run. I didn't want to give Sanguine more ammo. So I had to drag a suddenly struggling Frankie along with me. Fortunately, I was stronger than him. And Sanguine was rather slow himself. So I was able to get out onto the roof with Jasper. Olsen having already jumped over the edge. I leaned over for Jasper to get on my back again. And he clambered on. Of course. Frankie chose the moment I was off balance from Jasper to lash at me with a blade, cutting a gash in my arm and my suit. I just got it. I felt the drain of blood instantly. A stream of it leaving my arm towards Sanguine. And suddenly I found myself struggling with both Frankie and blood loss. I sealed off the injury and brought Frankie under control. But Sanguine now had a much larger cloud of blood surrounding him, which worked out in my favor when the micro units in the blood self-destructed, showering Sanguine in a dust cloud and sending him into a coughing fit. Time to go. I ran for the edge of the roof and jumped. Both Jasper and Frankie screamed as I launched the three of us over the edge and to the opposite roof. Admittedly, the landing was a bit awkward, considering I was carrying two of them and was suffering blood loss. Once we landed, I secured Frankie and let Jasper down, before checking to make sure that Sanguine wasn't following us somehow. No. He seemed to be stuck on the opposite roof. And since I heard sirens in the background, I doubted he'd be concerned with us for much longer. We had to hurry ourselves to meet up with Pebbles and the others. Well, that was quite the heart-pounder, said Jasper when he finally stopped gasping. Not that I'm ungrateful, mind you. But why did you drag Frankie along? He cut my suit. So I wanted him to pay me back. Jasper gave me a funny look before saying, "Air. I don't think Frankie is much inclined to do that. Oh, I know. I just didn't want to drop him and get blood on his jacket. Well. My jacket now. It was a behemoth relatively. It was hexagonal. Shaped somewhat like a spider with 5 legs coming off the hexagon corners. And with an array of sucrose rods coming off the 6th corner that formed the abdomen. All in all, the micro unit was just large enough to wrap its legs around a fat cell if it needed to. It was one of the largest micro unit models available. It was just finished being assembled. And as the last of the sucrose rods was placed, the complicated assemblage of wound-up molecules that made up its center was given a tap, activating it and setting the micro unit into motion. Disengaging from its mount, it was swept into the outgoing flow of micro units and into the bloodstream, along with thousands of its fellow units that had just been completed inside the factory. It flowed down the bloodstream quickly. This particular model of micro unit had 30 seconds of self-sustained operation time before it self-destructed. 70 seconds if it consumed the sucrose it carried itself. But that would likely be unnecessary. Instead, it bounced along the bloodstream, collecting a few errant nutrients out of the blood for itself. And then was shunted into an area of operation well before even half its minimum time was up. Once it was latched onto the nearest tissue wall, the micro unit began receiving the signal from the cord directly through the nerve cells. And its tinker-designed inner mechanisms were able to rewind themselves, halting and restarting the countdown on its self-destruction. Normally at this point it would begin breaking the sucrose rods with its inner mechanism and passing the resulting energy to other micro units that needed the boost with a tap. Or it would begin dismantling the cells of whatever organism it was invading and would burn the rods itself for additional operation time or speed. In this particular instance, the mission was something a bit outside its normal operating protocols. It crawled along the mass of tissue, the cells under its feet helping to carry it along and speed its journey to its target destination. Upon arrival, it approached a gathering of thousands of other micro units of various models, some much smaller than itself, who were working next to a, relatively, massive wall of inorganic molecules. This molecular wall was part of a foreign object that the micro units were attempting to repair. The unit stopped in front of a section of wall and waited while a recycler unit assembled the next molecule to add from base atoms. It obtained these atoms from its own internal supply, or had porter units pass it needed materials, all of which were added to the large drum that made up most of its body, completing the molecule. The recycler then unfolded to allow the oversized molecule to exit the drum, and the molecule was passed to several porter units to place in the appropriate spot on the wall. Now came the difficult part. The oversized molecule had to be threaded into the pattern of other molecules on the wall just so. And then it had to be bonded to a second molecule to complete the pattern and solidify its placement, while a recycler unit performed the bonding process. The large, spider-like tapper unit that had just arrived snapped a sugar molecule, and used the resulting energy to recharge the recycler that oversaw the bonding, as performing a function outside its design was consistently causing the recycler's inner mechanism to wind down too quickly. It was a difficult process. The micro units were designed for gathering materials and passing them to each other or to cells. Placing said materials into an unaffiliated structure that didn't receive the core signal was outside of their intended design. And the fact that most of the work was done at an atomic level meant the micro units had to be careful to not accidentally bond themselves to the wall. Nevertheless, despite the massive expenditure of energy, the micro units were making slow but steady progress. Maybe the energy added to the recycler was timed badly. Maybe the operator modules hadn't spaced the micro units correctly. Maybe the operation was taking place too close to the layer of skin that separated the cells and micro units from the outside world. Or maybe the recycler placed a carbon atom a little too far to the left. Whatever the cause, A massive bolt of lightning, really just a tiny static zap, lanced through the work area, killing cells and destroying micro-units. Normally it wouldn't have been that bad. Happened all the time. But in this instance it caused tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of micro-units to accidentally bond with the wall they were trying to repair. This damaged the wall. And damaged it again when the fused micro-units jammed. Failed to receive a signal through any connecting tissue. And then self-destructed. Breaking down large pieces of the wall as they destroyed themselves and anything attached to them. All in all, the tiny little static shock had destroyed most, if not all, of the work done to try and repair the suit socket had given me. Estimated time to full repair, 16 days. What was the proper curse to use in this situation? Damn it all, goddammit, stripped screws and blasted bolts, infernal machine. All of these and more were phrases Socket yelled when he was frustrated with his tools. But I wasn't sure if there was a specific one that was meant for just this situation. Probably. Goddammit, yeah. That seemed right. Goddammit. I was in the van with the other minions and Jasper. While Olsen was recounting our rescue of Jasper, with frequent interruptions from said individual, I had been trying to repair my suit. To little success. The molecules that made it up were too complex. And arranged in a strange, interwoven pattern that increased the suit's impact absorption properties, but made repairing it terribly difficult for my micro-units. Construction at a molecular level is different from normal. You can't handle atoms and molecules without forming some kind of bond to other atoms and molecules. And the micro-units were having difficulty letting go of the materials. Not normally a problem when I was just passing materials among my own parts. And to be honest, even if I had micro-unit designs that were better adapted for this type of work, I didn't have enough of the required base elements to patch up the hole anyways. Frankie's power hadn't just cut the suit. It had vaporized a hole through it. Which meant I couldn't just rebond one side of the tear to the other. I'd have to simply hope that Socket was willing to repair the damage. And I just got it too. Even worse was that the jacket Frankie had worn turned out to be unusable. I thought it was perfect as it had been baggy enough to fit over my suit. But Jasper had warned me against it, as apparently several of the symbols embedded or printed onto it were considered highly offensive to mutants. After finding that out, I was just about ready to toss Frankie over the side of the building when Jasper gave me some valuable advice. Tofu. We're in the clear now. Don't bother with him. Just let the police handle that ruffian. Isn't he a threat? I could get rid of him. Kids shouldn't trouble themselves with those kinds of thoughts. Besides, even if you killed him, there's always another goon willing to take his place. Absolutely brilliant. Jasper was right. I had been thinking of threats in the terms of singular opponents. This city was huge. And trying to remove every threat one at a time was a foolish endeavor. If it was even possible. But Frankie was a minor threat. I could easily beat him if I needed to. And if I let him live, he would use up resources that other threats might use to grow. Especially from the police and hero factions. They loved taking prisoners for whatever reason. And that had to be a large expenditure of resources. Leave it to Jasper to take a concept used for controlling single-cell organism populations and apply it to a macro scale. I'd need to step up my game, as Tim and Mikey sometimes said. While I pondered Jasper's advice and micro-unit efficiency, Olsen wrapped up our side of the event for the other minions. Ha! Good work, boneheads. What did I tell ya? Piece of cake. Said Pebbles as Olsen finished. Piece of cake my ass. Sanguine nearly got us. Replied Buzzer. Ah, Ifrit had it handled. Ain't that right, Prinper? Ifrit. Just work on your aim next time. You'll get a reputation for property damage like your mum if you don't, haha. I was trying not to hit civilians, muttered Ifrit. Well. At least we all got out of that shit show alive. Grumbled Buzzer. Exactly. And that's all that matters. Said Pebbles. Come on. I don't know about you guys. But henching always makes me hungry. Let's go give the guys at a drive-thru a scare. How's Mega Burger sound, my treat? It sounded great to me. For the next few minutes we talked about different things that happened on the mission. And Jasper went into a very long retelling of how he got captured. Because of this. It was when he was standing in the somewhat open space in the back of the van to pantomime an important part of his tale that the van shook. And Jasper was thrown off his feet. Oof. Careful with those brakes please, Pebbles. I've been quite shaken around enough as it is. Said Jasper as he recovered his footing. Yeah. See. A bit of bad news that. That wasn't the brakes. We might have to take a rain check on those burgers. The other minions and I looked at each other before crowding at the front of the van so we could see through the windshield. In front of the van were several humans in masks and colorful outfits. One of which was using a tendril of what appeared to be animated water to keep the van from moving. Heroes. What's the plan? I asked. Well. Said Buzzer as he pointed from one figure to another, he sounded irritated. Considering that's Hydrox. That is Ferosa. And that is goddamn Suprex. We are going to raise our hands. Surrender. Cooperate with anything they say that isn't take off your mask. And hope to high hell that Sandra sends someone to post our bail. I wasn't sure I liked this plan. No worries, gentlemen. I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. Said Jasper as he rubbed his hands together. Just let old Jasper clear this whole thing. Whatever he said next was drowned out in a chorus of no. Precinct E12 M Police Department. It was going to be one of those days. Please put all items in the bin. But they're my knives. Yes. I know that. Put them in the bin. And they will be returned to you. When you leave. Said Officer Barget for what felt like the millionth time. God, he hated working with supers. The masked minion he was talking to was one of the infamous Hellion's henchmen. And just like every other loon to ever put on a mask. It seemed like his purpose in life was to piss Barget off. He wished it was the hero's job to deal with the aftermath of their escapades. Or at least deal with some of the paperwork. Can't I just keep them? Tofu. Put the damn knives in the bin before you get shot. Said one of the other masked minions waiting to get processed. The minion Barget was dealing with sullenly placed 3 knives into the bin. Where he had already deposited some loose change. A phone. Several pieces of what might have once been a revolver. And 17 goddamn shivs made from various bits of metal. What was it about the masks who used knives that made them extra crazy? What? Did he think he could use them all at once? Where was he even keeping them after Barget was finally done with? Tofu, the next minion, stepped up in line. This one wearing red metal gauntlets. Any items you have on your person in the bin. Gloves too. I'm not taking my gloves off. They're for a medical condition. She instantly recited. Barget fought to keep his temper. Gregor. Gregor was seated in a chair that was far too small for his 8-foot frame. He sighed. And would have added his current seating situation to the list of things that irritated him about his mutation. Except that, tiny furniture had already been added long ago. He crossed his arms and tried to pay attention to the detective sitting across the table from him. So. You are Mr. Gregory Dyson, I presume. No. I am Gregor. He replied. So. You aren't the Gregory Dyson that was stabbed during a mugging last year and mutated to be 8 feet tall with green scales? Asked the detective while he read from a file. I have never met this Mr. Gregory Dyson you speak of. My name is Gregor. Okay, cut the crap. You're obviously Gregory Dyson. There aren't that many mutants who fit that description in E13. Detective. If you are basing your conclusion on my appearance, then I must protest this terrible case of profiling. Look here, you hissing son of a bi. Detective. Interrupted a man who had opened the door to the interview room. He gestured for the detective to come with him. And the detective left with him after glaring a final time at Gregor. Gregor sighed again. Not bothering to prevent it from fading into a hiss this time. He thought he'd been doing a pretty good job of keeping the hiss out of his voice. But it was always there. A strange undertone to his words that made them sound like he was imitating a snake. Of all the stupid things. He would have added it to the list. But again. It was already on there. Buzzer. I'm not saying a damn thing until you tell me what I'm being arrested for and let me call my lawyer. Mr. Buzzer. Was it you haven't been arrested? You've been detained as a person of interest related to the firebombing that took place earlier today. Well, in that case. I'm not saying a damn thing until you let me call my lawyer. Sir, I doubt that will be necessary. Necessary, my foot. I know how this works. I haven't done nothing and you've got nothing. I wouldn't say nothing. A van full of minions near the scene of a crime is a cause for concern. Minions, who said anything about minions? We were out for lunch. You're wearing a mask. And is that a crime? Well. Seems to me most people don't pile into an unmarked van wearing masks to simply get lunch. And it seems to me that I have yet to be able to call my goddamned lawyer. There's no need to shout, sir. I'll yell as much as I want. This is the Americas. The detective sent to deal with Buzzer rubbed at his temples. Obviously developing a headache. Which was partly due to the frustration of dealing with the obnoxious individual in front of him. But was mostly due to the subsonic frequencies Buzzer was pumping into the room. If there was one thing Buzzer knew, it was that a distracted opponent was an easy opponent. He only hoped the newbies would be able to keep their mouths shut until Sandra could spring them from this mess Pebbles had dragged him into. Tofu. My name is Tofu. My favorite food is tofu burgers. I am definitely 18 years of age or older. I don't like rats. Or yellow-furred animals that have large claws. Or guns that are pointed at me. And I like sugar. And rectangular objects just like everyone else. Can I have the donuts now? Sure, kid. 1 SEC. Said the detective as he hurried to scribble down what the kid was saying. I just have a few more questions and then you can have the donuts. Do you have a name I can call you? My name is Tofu. I said that. I mean a real name. Not a moniker. It's Tofu. Right. Do you have any parents I can call? Where are you from? My parents cannot be called. But I am from Fortress City. Kid. This isn't the time for jokes. This is a very serious situation you're in. Hellions henchmen are bad people, and if you associate with them you're headed for a hard life. Look. If you work with us here maybe we can cut you a deal. You're wearing one of their powered masks. We could probably get you into the sidekick program. It's not too late to join the heroes. Be on the right side of the law. What do you say? May I please have the donuts now? Ifrit. Ifrit sat with her arms crossed, tapping the tips of her gauntlet fingers one at a time to produce a quiet but steady rhythm where the metal-clad fingertips met the material of her suit. There's no reason to be nervous, miss. She didn't answer, continuing to tap her fingers. I'd like to ask you some questions if you don't mind. Again. No response. You put down your name as Ifrit. That's a moniker I'm assuming. How long have you been associated with Hellions henchmen? Tap. 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 Seems like an interesting vocation for a young lady to get into so early in life. Tap. 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 It can't be easy. Working with such dangerous criminals. Mutants. Monsters. The tapping stopped. And was replaced with the sound of screeching metal as Ifrit closed the fingers she had been tapping into a tight fist. Cough, right. Well. I'll be right back. Forgot a file. He didn't come back. And Ifrit resumed her tapping. Jasper. And then when my situation seemed most dire, they swooped in and rescued me in my time of need, delivering me from the clutches of those dastardly ruffians. So. You're saying you were rescued from the Espada? By Hellions henchmen? I know not who my rescuers were. For they wore masks. But I can assure you that by the caliber of their actions they were heroes one and all. Without them I would surely have perished. They were wearing Hellions henchmen masks. They're still wearing the masks. They refuse to take them off. As they should. By the laws of Fortress City, wearing a mask to protect one's identity is legally allowed. Amendment 5. Subsection C. Clause 2 is the specific rule you're looking for, I believe. Damn it, Jasper. You're in here every other week with a new accent and a new scheme. I've got mountains of paperwork without adding your shenanigans to the pile. Detective Mullaney, I assure you that I am entirely on the up and up. Your paranoia speaks to me of stress. Are you overworking yourself? Come on. You can tell old Jasper. How are the wife and kids? By the way, you told me little Ricky was in the science fair, if I remember correctly. How did that turn out? Detective Mullaney buried his face in his hands and complained about the science fair. Olsen. So. The infamous red shirt minion. Never thought I'd get lucky enough to book you. Sorry to disappoint. But my name's Olsen. Easy mistake. Lots of people with red shirts out there. Besides. I heard that guy died. Well, I've heard he walked it off. Couldn't tell you, sir. So you're telling me if someone shot you right now you wouldn't just bounce right up? Proving that you are one of Hellions henchmen. I sincerely doubt it. But don't take my word for it. Go ahead and test it. Of course. If you're wrong. The detective couldn't see the grin on Olsen's face. But he could definitely hear it in his damned smug voice. Pebbles. Can you at least confirm whether or not Pebbles is your real name or a moniker? Pebbles sat unresponding. With his arms crossed. Leaning back in his chair. And the detective across from him was starting to lose his patience. Pebbles was a known entity to the E12 police departments. And the E13 police departments. And the police departments of almost a dozen other sectors. Normally that would have been enough to book both him and the other minions he was caught with. But unfortunately this time he hadn't been caught committing a crime. Which meant that despite matching the description for one Seth, Pebbles, Kelmet. By the laws of Fortress City, unless they got an admittance that he was either Seth Kelmet or the minion known as Pebbles, they couldn't actually arrest him. Only hold him temporarily as a person of interest. Once upon a time a physical description might have been enough. But odd summer had ruined that reality. And Fortress City had accepted the new reality with accommodating laws and a fanfare of red tape. The detective kept trying to cajole a response. Any response. Out of the frustratingly mute minion. But he hadn't had any luck. Pebbles just sat there. Staring from behind his mask and making the detective more and more frustrated. Pebbles and his group hadn't been operating with a supervillain. And this was the perfect opportunity to put away some minions for good if he could just get a sliver of evidence that they were really minions working with Hellions henchmen. And not just idiots in masks out for lunch like they claimed. Suddenly Pebbles muttered something. The detective stopped mid-word and leaned in to hear what he was saying. He'd take even insults as opposed to silence at this point. I'm sorry. I didn't catch that. What did you say? Pebbles was silent for a moment before he spoke again. But again it was too quiet for the detective to hear. I'm sorry. Could you speak up a little? Pebbles continued trying to talk. But the detective still couldn't make out the words. Was something wrong with Pebbles' voice? He stood up from his chair and leaned in, trying to catch whatever it was Pebbles was trying to say. ZZZ. What, ZZZ? Wake up! Yelled the detective as he slammed his fist on the table. Pebbles heard that one at least, and overbalanced in his chair a bit as he woke up, luckily failing to topple over. Whoa! What, did they post bail already? The detective grit his teeth and said. You were never under arrest. You are being detained as a person of interest on the recommendation of an accredited hero. Oh. Right, said Pebbles as he settled back into his chair. Mind keeping it down until it's time to leave. The detective was about to lose a gasket before there was a polite knock at the door. In stepped a woman in a nice suit and carrying a briefcase who the detective didn't recognize. But Pebbles certainly did. Seemed Sandra had personally shown up to extricate them. Hello there, detective. My name is Sandra Baker. I'm here to speak to my client. Would you mind if we had a moment alone? I'm not exactly finished with. No problem at all. It'll only take a minute or two. A flustered detective was somehow convinced that vacating the room was in his best interests. And then Sandra turned to Pebbles, who was suddenly sitting a lot straighter than he had been. She moved to the table and commandeered the detective's abandoned seat. Well. Seems you've had quite the adventure, said Sandra coolly, while she put her briefcase up on the table. Inside were some legal documents. But most of the briefcase was taken up by jamming equipment to keep their conversation from being overheard or recorded. Heh. Not really. It seemed pretty normal. Oh, that's right. You signed up for a simple training mission. An easy patrol through the red zone to show them the area. Nothing really exciting about that. Well. Why, see. There were a few complications. I am well aware. Honestly, Pebbles. Going in without a cauda espada aren't heroes. They're thugs and killers on the best of days. What were you thinking? Jasper's life was at stake. And while I feel bad for the situation he was in, putting multiple employees at risk, 2 of them 18-year-olds, was not the way to handle the situation. Sandra, they aren't exactly defenseless teenagers. Whatever else Pebbles was going to say died under Sandra's withering glare. He had a really good argument about how risks were inherent to the job, and how they had based their decision to go in on the best information they had available. But apparently that argument would never see the light of day. Now then. I've mostly got this situation handled here. But there are a few things I need to wrap up first. Luckily the heroes made a few mistakes with jurisdiction that should help speed this process up. As for you, since you like spending so much time in E12, you can help the newbies with our next job. The client was impressed with the footage of the last job and made a special request for the newbies to come. It'll be this Saturday. Pebbles hesitated. He didn't like the cold smile that Sandra suddenly had. What kind of job? Oh. Just a simple bank robbery. A bank robbery? Who's stupid enough to rob a bank in Fortress City? No. He's already paid in advance. Sandra. Anyone but him. Now. He's one of our best customers and he pays for all the extras himself. Which reminds me. The hazard pay for this particular stunt is coming out of your paycheck. But. That. Okay. That's fair. But Trebla the Terrible really? Yes really. Now. I'm going to go see if I can't get Tofu's knife collection returned. And you're going to stay here and listen to the rest of the good detective's questions. I want a full report when you get back to base. And with that she left Pebbles to contemplate his life choices. He was really hoping that at least Buzzer wouldn't get pulled into the upcoming job. Otherwise he'd never hear the end of it. Perhaps literally. And shit. If Sandra was this pissed, then he'd better avoid Hellion for the next few days. He shuddered at the thought of his boss actually angry. Well, anything to say for yourself, said the detective who had entered and picked up his questioning right where he left off. Yeah. Never piss off the HR department. Taste buds are pretty amazing. Consider the 2 donuts I'm holding. In my right hand. A donut with chocolate glaze. In my left hand. A donut with maple glaze. If I were to simply absorb the 2 donuts, their value as materials would be nearly identical. But if I eat them with a human mouth, while using taste buds, and filter the resulting data through a human brain, suddenly eating either donut becomes an entirely different experience. The chocolate donut had a slightly bitter quality to it that was only enhanced by the sugar. And maple wound up being just sweet. But it was a different sweetness. Tangy. Maybe more research had to be done. Maybe humans had a better word for it. Finishing my donuts, I scanned the box for the next one I wanted to try. What's this one? I asked the police minion. Coconut. I grabbed it. The little pale flakes looked like sugar at first. But they actually turned out to be some kind of organic material without much flavor, the coconut. I presumed. I guess they were more for texture. Sometimes texture was important. Although I think humans valued it more than I did. Isn't it really neat how they are all donuts? But they all taste different. He sighed. I suppose I never really thought about it before. I believe the emotion the police minion is expressing is melancholy depression. I had been answering what questions I could. But admittedly the only thing I told him was useless personal information. And not information about Hellion's henchmen like he probably wanted. I almost felt bad. He had been rather polite and friendly given I was suspected of being a member of an opposing faction, not to mention giving me a box of donuts. Want a donut? And I offered the box to him. Sure. For the next few minutes, I went about eating and cataloging the donuts. When I was nearly done, the door to the room opened, revealing Sandra. And another police minion who gestured for the one who had been questioning me to follow. Sandra entered the room and the police left, closing the door behind them. Hello Sandra. What are you doing here? Getting you boneheads out of trouble. Especially you. You do realize this is the second time in 3 days where you've decided to play hero. Maybe we should stick you in the sidekick program. Ack. Why did people keep recommending sidekick work to me? Please don't stick me in the sidekick program. She chuckled. Tofu, I'm kidding. But I am being serious about being a bit more careful. That trick you pulled with Magenta was fine. But fighting real villains like Sanguine is above your pay grade. Don't put yourself in that kind of danger if you can help it. Alright Sandra. I wasn't trying to get into danger. Things just sort of turned out that way. As long as you're trying. Now. How about you give me the full details? For the next few minutes I relayed my version of events. Sandra asking for clarification now and then. When I got to the part where I tunneled through the floor and killed the 2 guards, she frowned a bit. But when I asked about it she just said to continue. I was just getting to the part where the heroes showed up when there was a knock at the door. And the police minion who had been asking me questions walked in with what looked like a very large smartphone. Here's what you requested, he said. Somewhat grudgingly. And handed the device to Sandra. She thanked him and took it. before prompting him to leave. Before he did, he looked at me and said, "Remember what I said, kid. Get out while you still can." Then he turned to Sandra and said, "And if you care at all about your client, you'll tell him the same thing." "Officer, I'm not sure what you mean." "TCH. Yeah, right. If Hellion has to resort to pulling kids off the street for henchmen, then her days are numbered. I'd wash my hands of it if I were you. If you even can." Then the officer left, slamming the door behind him. Sandra quirked an eyebrow in my direction. "What was that about?" He said it was too dangerous being a minion. And that I should join the sidekick program." Sandra snorted. "Well, if that isn't the pot calling the kettle black. I didn't know what that meant. I wish they hadn't taken my phone." "Well, let's see what the damage looks like," she said, and opened the folder the officer had given her. She scanned the words displayed on the device she held. And the farther she read, the more she frowned. "Tofu. Why did you answer so many questions? He said if I did I could have donuts." "Tofu. Didn't I just pay you a large cash advance? You could buy dozens of donuts. Did you spend it all already?" "Not all of it. Between Maggie's, the arcade, the new phone, rebuilding mass due to all the trouble I had returning Nicole's phone, and the amazing amount of street vendors. I had gone through the $1,000 much faster than I had anticipated. I did make sure to keep enough for a few tofu burgers at Maggie's though." "You aren't spending it on drugs or something, are you?" asked Sandra. I noticed a slightly angry tone in her voice. "No, I spent it mostly on food. I have a high metabolism." She frowned at my answer before asking, "You really spent it all on food?" "Yes. And a phone and a few rounds of gremlins and ghouls at the arcade." She rolled her eyes. "And I assume by high metabolism you just mean you need to eat enough to fuel your shape-shifting." "Yes. Just making sure. I might need to give you a pamphlet on money management. Now, in the future I will warn you not to answer personal questions even with fake answers like these. You never know what they might glean from them." And then she let out a small chuckle. "I can see why he thought you were homeless though. Putting tunnels as your residence. If you're going to lie you need to make it believable." I didn't have anything to say about that. And she noticed, her eyes narrowing. Ack. She was another perceptive human like Mikey. "Tofu, are you homeless?" "I have a place to stay." "Is it a tunnel?" "Yes." She placed a hand over her eyes and rubbed her temples. "Tofu. Why didn't you bring this up during your job interview? We went over employee housing options, didn't we?" "I didn't think it was important." "How could you not?" "All right. When we get back you and me are going to discuss employee housing. But I don't really need." "No buts." After that Sandra gave me a lecture on dealing with the police, with a few mentions on how to use money more wisely thrown in. Apparently I should use a grocery store. And not just buy from vendors. I'd need my phone back to look up what a grocery was. When she finished she said, "I'll be taking you and Ifrit back with me in a bit. The police can't hold you as long as the others do to your age. I just need to speak with a few more people and then we can go. Don't talk to any police." Will I get my stuff back?" "Yes. But they are confiscating the gun parts. That's actually another thing we need to go over. You're lucky they were just parts. And not an actual gun. The laws about carrying a gun are quite strict. But Imp uses guns. And he accepts the risks of being caught with them. We'll go over this in detail later. For now I have to make sure everyone gets out without a strike on their record." Sandra left. And I was forced to wait for over an hour before anyone came to get me. I really wish they hadn't taken my phone. Eventually a police minion came to get me. And led me to where Sandra was. Ifrit was already with her. Surprisingly they did give my stuff back. Minus the gun parts. Although Ifrit warned me not to turn my phone on until Socket had checked it over. Ifrit and I had to fill out some paperwork. Which Sandra guided us through. And then we followed Sandra out of the building. Just like that. This seems rather strange. They just let us leave. Well. After some coaxing from yours truly. Replied Sandra. They wouldn't have been able to keep you anyways though. I just sped things along. The heroes messed up by picking you up over in E13. But then bringing you to E12. If you had committed a crime they would have been fine. But of course. You did no such thing. At this she winked at the two of us. Sandra led us to a shiny black four-door car. She clicked a small device she pulled from a pocket. And the car responded with a strange chirping noise before the doors all clicked. I followed Ifrit's example and sat in one of the back seats. The front passenger seat was taken up with boxes of paper files. Once we were all buckled in, Sandra started the car. And drove us out of the parking lot and in the direction of Ashwood St. While Sandra drove she made small talk. Mostly mumbling about district regulations. But she did mention Sanguine. And how it was a shame that he survived the culling of the Espada's leaders. Apparently Sanguine was one of the leaders who might be able to repair the broken faction. I wasn't pleased to learn that. I didn't want them to reach a level where they could again drain resources from Hellions' henchmen. They were supposed to drain resources from other threatening factions. Not mine. I'm sorry, Sandra. Said Ifrit suddenly. In her raspy voice. Why's that, hun? I couldn't get Sanguine. Replied Ifrit. Sandra snorted. Hun. People have been trying to get Sanguine for a long time. He's a survivor. It's not that. She hesitated and glanced in my direction. Then apparently made up her mind to keep speaking. I had the shot. I just couldn't. Oh. I see. Don't feel bad about that. It's not supposed to be easy. Tofu did it fine with the guards. I wasn't sure what Sandra was talking about. Sanguine obviously wasn't a minor threat that could be released for later. And if Ifrit had killed him when she had the chance it would have made rescuing Jasper a lot easier. Maybe she needed more practice with proper threat assessment still. That was a rather critical error in judgment. How could she make such an obvious mistake? Yes. Well. That's not the only skill that counts. Said Sandra. Tofu has things he's good at. And you have things you're good at. Like using common sense when being interrogated by police. Isn't that right, Tofu? It's a good thing I came to check and see how things were going. Ack. Touché, I guess. So. Is that why you came yourself? My mom didn't ask you to bail me out, asked Ifrit. For the rest of the drive Ifrit was much more talkative. Sandra actually drove to a parking garage instead of one of the vehicle access tunnels. Then she took an elevator up to the third level of Ashwood St. While Ifrit and I took a secret elevator to the base. I had instructions to store my gear and meet Sandra in her office for the housing arrangements. I'd never had gear to store before. So Ifrit showed me where the locker rooms were, divided into male and female areas. As well as telling me the procedure to request suit repairs. I was very glad that suit repairs were apparently commonplace. From what I had seen of what Socket did for Hellions' henchmen, I doubted he had the time to individually repair every single suit. And I had been worried that getting it repaired would take a long time. I removed my suit in one of the sectioned off changing cubicles. Then I adjusted my disguise. Then I stored the suit in an empty locker. Input my name onto the security pad. And pressed the button that would mark the locker for suit repairs. I was back to just my mask and my normal disguise of baggy clothes. Leaving the locker room, I went in search of Socket to get my phone checked out. He wasn't available. But another one of the minions that worked in the garage was able to help me check the phone, placing it in one of the multitude of devices that littered the garage to get scanned. He didn't find anything. And I thanked him for helping before heading to Sandra's office. I was glad my phone wasn't compromised. I had a long list of words to search for my time at the police station. A grocery turned out to be a vendor dedicated to food. So I was looking forward to that. But I might need more clarification on what Sandra meant by strike. My searches for strikes on records were only turning up accounts of different types of training exercises. Baseball and bowling featuring predominantly among the results. I headed to the elevators up to Ashwood St. Proper. And put away my mask before I exited into the fake clothing store. Viewing the bulky winter clothes, I considered a few of them for my disguise. But discarded the idea. They would fit over the minion suit. But they would stand out too much in the summer weather. Maybe Sandra could direct me to a store. I headed to Sandra's office at 512. And entered to find Viper at her normal spot. She waved me into Sandra's open office. Inside, Sandra was seated at her desk. And she was working on several stacks of paper arranged around her. There you are, Tofu. Please sit. I've also got some information about the next job I might as well go over with you. She described the job and who it would be with. I didn't recognize the name. Trebla the Terrific. But a bank was a money storage facility if my searches were accurate. After we finished going over the job details, we then began discussing a living space for myself. I didn't have any problem with the location, as I doubted I would actually spend time there. But when the price was mentioned, I balked. Do I really need a place? I am fine with my tunnel. Tofu. I won't have an employee living on the street. Especially not an 18-year-old. $500 a month is a very reasonable price. You'll just have to learn not to waste your money on snacks. But $500 is almost 50 tofu burgers. It's a lot more than just 50 burgers. If you make them yourself, you'll get a lot more out of it. I will. She rolled her eyes and muttered something about supervillain parenting. Yes. But you'll need somewhere to cook and store ingredients. Honestly, I can't believe I'm having this much trouble convincing someone to not be homeless. I told you teens are trouble. Yelled Viper from the other room. Quiet you. Sandra yelled back. Then she turned to me. Anyways, if you're that picky about money, I have some other work you can do as well. It's tedious non-powered work. But there's no real risk involved. I'm fine with that. Alright. As for the apartment, just try it out for a bit. If it's really a problem, we'll work something out. Now. Where did I put those pamphlets? She went through stacks of paper and handed me a few documents to look over and sign. As well as a few pamphlets about budgeting. While I went through the papers, she continued doing her work. And a few times other humans who I assumed to be minions stepped in to ask her about payroll. Or about specific jobs from clients. Even after I finished my paperwork, she was still busy. And she asked me to wait while she made a phone call. Hey Cindy. This is Sandra. Are you still at the base? Wonderful. I was wondering if you could do me a favor. I'm sitting here with Tofu. And he needs to be shown the employee housing. But I'm getting swamped in. Would you be alright with showing him around? You're sure? Thank you so much, hun. I appreciate it. She hung up and turned to me. Cindy will be here in a bit. She also lives in one of the employee apartments. So she can give you the tour. Here's your key and the address. And she handed a small flat rectangle to me with a number printed on it, as well as a piece of paper with the street address. I waited in the front lobby with Viper. She ignored me as usual. But I noticed she was playing a game on her phone. One I didn't recognize. What game is that? She glanced up at me before rolling her eyes and going back to her game. It's Tetris Bash. Oh, do you play Gremlin Tamer? Yeah. She didn't look up from her game. I've gotten to level 4. She snorted. Level 98. Get good, scrub. I tried to get her to tell me how she did it. But she steadfastly refused. It was when I was trying to pester her into telling me what a purple gremlin needed for level 5. That another human approached and addressed me. This one was young and female. With short, curly brown hair. And wearing jeans. A pink shirt with stylized words on it. A black hoodie. And a pair of black hand coverings that looked like they were made of a thin, soft material. I wouldn't have recognized her. But her raspy voice was an instant identifier. Hey. You're Tofu, right? Sandra wanted me to show you the apartments. Hello, Ifrit. Yes. She did. Out of mask, it's Cindy. What do I call you? Just Tofu is fine. K. This way. She waved her hand in a follow motion and began walking to the door. I made to follow her. But Lily's, she wasn't wearing her mask either. Clawed hand was suddenly reaching over the desk and grabbing my shoulder, preventing me from walking away. She leaned in and began to whisper. Hey. You've been fitting in pretty well. And Sandra vouches for you. But just in case, 'cause Cindy any grief. And I'll be first in line to gut you. Then she patted my shoulder and gave me a small shove in Cindy's direction. I wonder what that was about. Cindy led me a few blocks away and out over some of the third-level bridges between buildings. Over the horizon the sun was setting, the police station had taken a lot of time. And the tall buildings and bridges created an interesting pattern of shadows. We walked in silence. And it was about halfway to our destination that I realized what was off about Cindy. She was a mutant. It wasn't readily apparent. At first glance she appeared completely normal. But there were small things that gave it away. One of which was a second set of translucent eyelids that closed shut horizontally when she blinked. And another was when the wind shifted. And I detected trace amounts of a chemical that would act as a flame retardant mixed into her sweat. I had assumed that her ability to throw fireballs was a power. But apparently it was a product of Mutavis. That must be why Viper warned me off. Others must have targeted Cindy for her rare and valuable mutation. Bleh. Viper needn't have threatened me. I would love to know how Cindy's biology worked. But I wasn't suicidal. I had heard enough to piece together that Cindy was Hellian's offspring. And I knew how protective humans could be of each other. If a vigilante took offense at killing random muggers, then Hellion would probably make me a barbecue if I so much as injured Cindy. I was almost insulted that Viper would think me so stupid. We arrived at a tall apartment building. Several bridges extended to its third level. And the ground level wasn't visible past the sections of the second level around the building. On the second level I noted a marked-off rectangular area next to the building, where several humans were involved in a training exercise involving a ball and 2 metallic hoops. A lot of them had black masks on. Is that baseball? I asked and pointed. She arched an eyebrow at me. That's basketball, dude. Oh. Are strikes good or bad in that 1 inch? She chuckled. You can ask to join in if you want to learn. Most of the people in this building work for Hellion. Or they don't mind if you do. Okay. She led me to the third level entrance. And showed me how to use the key card on the door lock. Inside it seemed like a standard apartment building layout. And she led me to my room on the second floor. We passed quite a few people on the way. And Cindy greeted them all by name, introducing them to me briefly. I was impressed when she even got the names right of two young, brown-scaled mutants, who as far as I could tell were identical down to their DNA. Maybe she had practiced telling them apart. She seemed quite friendly with them. We reached the apartment that matched the number on my keycard. And this time I opened it with the keycard myself to make sure I had it right. Then Cindy turned to me. It's kinda small. But it has a kitchen corner and its own toilet. There's a grocery down the block on the second level. And if you head for the ground level you'll want to wear your mask so people don't bother you. Oh. And don't rob any of the stores near here please. They pay their dues to Hellion. Okay. Thank you for showing me the way, Cindy. No problem. And welcome to the team. Then she reached a gloved hand out in a customary human greeting. I shook it. And she nodded before heading off. I guess handshakes work for goodbyes too. I entered the apartment to explore. Inside it was pretty much what she had said. Two small rooms. One with a sectioned-off corner and several appliances I assumed made it the kitchen. And a second room with a tiny attached toilet room. Surprisingly, the second room contained a small bed. The only furniture I had seen in the otherwise empty apartment. I guess humans considered a rectangular sleeping area to be critical enough that it was provided. It explains why Sandra pushed so hard for me to have a home even if it was a waste of money. Sigh. At least there was a window in both rooms. Which meant I had multiple exits in an emergency. This grocery idea better be worth it. I left the apartment in search of the grocery. I found it. And yes. It was very much worth it. So worth it. Sandra was right and I was wrong. And I knew what I had to do. Sanguine was pissed. For the past 2 hours he had paced the small warehouse office he had commandeered. Shuffling slowly back and forth with the use of his cane. Several minions had come in and out to receive orders or tasks. But mostly they just received an insult and were told to get out. Or if they really pressed their luck they would receive an injury and a small bloodletting. Normally Sanguine was a bit more composed. But the disastrous events of the past few days had sapped the last of his patience. The Espada were done. The writing was on the wall. Sanguine had been through failures like this before. And recognized the signs. It was only unfortunate that this one was coming so late in his life. He was still healthy. His power ensured it. But he was 95 now. The health benefits of controlling his own blood had propped him up well. But age still came to him. He had what? Another decade too. If he pushed it in anger he swiped his cane across the only desk in the room. Throwing a lonely ceramic coffee mug onto the floor. Where it shattered. The minion brave enough to poke his head in at the noise received the task of cleaning the pieces. He might need to try a new sector though. E12's supply of purist idiots had dwindled. And the ones left were either fed up with the Espada. Or smart enough to keep their heads down. Maybe he should head to NE12, try to galvanize the suburbanites into fearing the other sector's poor population moving into their relatively quiet suburbs. Poor versus slightly poorer never took too long to set up. On the other hand, enough of the lower rank and file had survived to maybe get the ball rolling on another anti-muti movement. No point in throwing away a resource this late in the game if he could help it. He just needed a good location. Maybe go all the way to E10, close enough they knew about the Espada's trials versus the mutants. But far enough they hadn't been too negatively affected by the Espada's methods. He would need a new name for the group though. Or the capes would be on it too quickly. Another vaguely crusade-ish sounding word maybe. In Spanish of course. This was still California. It needed to seem sympathetic to the local roots. He sat down in a plush office chair to think. placing his cane to the side and picking up a small remote. There was an old flat-screen TV mounted on the wall which he turned on to the news. More for the ambient noise than anything else. And thought over plans on how to recover from this latest disaster. Eventually he began to doze. The hour was late. A noise woke him up. A soft thump. Had he knocked his cane over, dropped the remote? No and no. And it was much later now. The minions wouldn't be bothering him. They weren't that stupid. Something was wrong. He bit his cheek. The blood flowing into his mouth incredibly fast given the insignificant wound. Sanguine got up faster than one would expect from someone his age. And immediately he noticed the air vent grate lying on the floor. He looked up. And flinched back as the large humanoid figure landed nearly on top of him, knocking him to the floor. It was on him in a second, grappling him while taking care to not use so much force that it punctured his skin, trying to cover his mouth and nose to strangle him. Shit. Whoever it was knew about his power. Too bad for them, he was too experienced to be caught by such a gambit. He spat. The pooled blood in his mouth shooting forward like a shotgun blast. Droplets and ribbons of blood cut into the shadowed face of his attacker. And then he pulled, expecting the torrent of blood that would leave his attacker a husk. Nothing came of it. Oh. Liquid flowed. But it wasn't blood. And Sanguine's power couldn't find purchase on it. Even the blood he had spat didn't return in full. Whatever liquid fueled the attacker had diluted or destroyed most of it. Suddenly both combatants changed tactics. Sanguine spat more blood at his opponent's head. The attacker inserted claws into Sanguine's eye sockets. And for a brief moment they raced for who could destroy the other's brain faster. Sanguine lost. Unsurprising given the attacker's brain was no longer located in its head. The attacker tore into the body of Sanguine and absorbed the remains, making sure that there would be no regeneration. No last-second powered recovery. There was soon no trace that Sanguine had ever been in the office at all. And the assassin would have left with none being the wiser. But an Espada minion unfortunately poked her head in. "Hey boss. You up?" Frank made it ba, holy shit. The assassin rushed the minion. But she was fast enough to slam the door and go running down the hall yelling a warning. The attacker slumped. So much for stealth. Maybe it could still get out through the air vent, but it wouldn't be good to get caught in a narrow vent though. The decision was made for it when multiple minions burst through the door. The leader of the pack, Frankie himself. The attacker's face was warped from all the shifting and healing that had occurred. Nevertheless, the tilt of its head and what features remained clearly indicated its surprise. Then it spoke in a surprisingly clear voice. "Frankie, why are you here?" Sanguine threw you away. I thought you'd at least be smart enough to cause trouble somewhere else. That's strike 3. Frankie's face colored in anger and confusion. Wah, who the hell you think you are? Answer the damn question. The subway. My suit. And now you're in my way. That's 3 strikes. What the hell you talking about? 3 strikes, Frankie. You're out. It's too bad that the Espada were so anti-mutant. If they had some combat models they might have actually stood a chance. The unmodified human body is pretty amazing in some respects. But not so much in a fight with sharp weapons. Poke one too many holes and they can't even stop themselves from bleeding out. Take Frankie for instance, 3 knives to the gut and a severed hamstring. And now he was bleeding out in the middle of the room. While the crowd of Espada minions tried to figure out how to get past me. They had knives. Pipes. And some of the braver ones tried to use their fists. But I don't think their combat training was very good. Terrible footwork. They barely watched their placement. And unlike rats they had no sense of teamwork or using numbers to their advantage. One of them had a gun. But she had been too hesitant to shoot while I was entangled with her allies. A mistake that allowed me to steal the gun from her without her firing any meaningful shots. If I were to judge it though, their worst mistake was probably letting me get between them and the only door. I ripped the throat out of one of the last minions in front of me. And then there were only 4. Frankie. A minion that had fainted when I threw one minion's head into the crowd. And a female who was trying to help a male push his guts back in. Now all that was left was cleanup. I just hoped that I could get it done quickly. Before anyone else showed up. There were probably more Espada as perimeter guards or whatever. But I just wanted to get rid of the ones who had seen me. I stabbed the unconscious minion and any other corpses that looked relatively undamaged. For Frankie, I didn't bother getting close. I just threw knives at him until his power deactivated and he stopped moving. And then a few more for good measure. Then I approached the wounded male. Surprisingly, he was doing rather well considering the extent of his wounds. He was almost sitting upright. And was talking with the female. You have to. I can feel it already. I'm so hungry. No. That's impossible. Your reaction is so strong. It can't be Mutavis. We can figure something out or her words trailed off. And she recoiled from me as I reached them. Mutavis. I examined the male's gut wound for a moment and was pleasantly surprised. The tissues were knitting themselves back together slowly. And his guts were being pulled back into place from the inside. It wasn't as impressive or quick as the yellow fur had been. But it was far above what a normal human could do. Plus, there were small indicators of other changes beginning to take place. Bone growth. And new tissue formations that were beginning to close the gaping wound in his abdomen. It wasn't just regeneration. It was also modification. This must be a mutation in action. I hadn't gotten to see one so far. And I was eager to get good samples of the virus itself. It had been surprisingly elusive considering how infectious it was supposed to be. I reached for the mutating male. When the female suddenly shrieked. Dawn, touch him, you freak. This is all your fault. You monster. I ignored the screaming female and reached for the male. When suddenly the female tackled me. I was surprised she would attempt such an ineffective maneuver. And shoved her away immediately. I noticed the burning a second later. Damage to epidermis detected. Estimated threat, high. Where she had touched me my flesh was burned. Some kind of acid. I quickly ejected the affected areas. And retreated from the unexpected threat. If the vector was touch-based I needed to create distance. Had she been hiding a weapon? Doubtful. She wouldn't have waited until all her allies were dead to pull out an effective weapon. As I watched, a clear liquid started to drip from her rapidly. And pool around her. Everything it touched sizzled and dissolved, furniture. The thin carpet. Her own clothes. And the dead bodies around her. She herself ignored the substance. And got to her feet while still yelling obscenities. Apparently she was immune to the substance herself. Then she looked at me and swung an arm. I dodged the resulting shower of droplets and retreated to the door. The droplets burning sizzling holes into the carpet where I had been standing. Was this a mutation or a power? Biologically she appeared unchanged. But the amount of liquid coming off of her was physically more than her body could hold unless she was converting it out of the air somehow. She swept an arm in my direction again. And this time a thick spray of the clear acid came off her arm. Rushing towards me. I dodged again. But noticed she was already gathering more acid to throw. This time in an unnaturally writhing mass around her hand. Definitely a power. She must have triggered just now. She was using it effectively regardless. And her control was growing by the second. This was rapidly becoming too dangerous to continue observations. I pulled out the handgun I stole earlier in the fight. And shot her multiple times in the head and torso. Until I was out of bullets. She fell forward and slammed into the floor. Unmoving. And hopefully dead. Then. Surprisingly. Her body began to change colors rapidly. Right before it lost cohesion and dissolved. Becoming the very acid it had been producing. The additional volume of acid created a tiny wave that swept outwards. Encompassing the rest of the room, while I retreated outside the door. And all the objects in it. Including the mutating male. He screamed briefly. But the aggressively corrosive substance outpaced his regeneration easily. And devoured him completely. Along with all the other nearby bodies and furniture. After the male died. The room was suddenly quite silent. The only sound was the sizzle of acid as it slowly settled over the floor of the room. I dipped a finger into the substance. To try and analyze it. But it was so corrosive that it just destroyed the micro units. And I couldn't get a reading on the composition. Disappointment. I scanned the room a final time. Noting how the acid ate anything that wasn't stone or metal, and those still looked somewhat corroded. At the current volume it would probably dissolve most everything before it finally neutralized or evaporated. Sigh. At least cleanup had been easy. I sat in the back of the taxi and pondered the last few hours. Luckily. The acid-producing female had stayed dead. The manner in which her body disintegrated had been very odd. But my internet searches for an explanation hadn't really turned up anything. Closest thing I could find was a reference to bad triggers. But I doubted that applied in this case. Her power had been working fine up until she died. I attributed the strange disintegration to just an oddity of her power. One thing this brought to the forefront was that I really needed to figure out a viable ranged weapon. Sandra argued against using a gun due to the legal risks. But I was a bit more concerned with the physical risks of not having a ranged option. Luckily the one I stole was in much better condition than the first one I acquired. I didn't have any more bullets. But dismantling the gun gave me a much clearer picture of the subtle details that went into it. Like the barrel rifling to make projectiles spin. I wouldn't have thought of that myself. Now I just needed a design that worked with bone and muscle. If mechanical guns were no good, then a biological gun would have to do. Surely there would be no arguments if it was produced by my power. I might have to clear it with Sandra anyways though. I was having trouble keeping details from her. And I didn't think I could win an argument with her. Not that it seemed like arguing with her was a productive idea anyways. She had been right about a lot of things so far. Like when she told Ifrit, Tofu has things he's good at. And you have things you're good at. Ifrit was better at blowing things up and causing property damage. And I was good at killing. Since we were a team. It only made sense that I get rid of the threats that Ifrit couldn't. Though I was a bit worried that Sandra would find out I killed Sanguine. And after she told me not to go near him. Hopefully if she did find out my success in the endeavor would placate her. Tracking Sanguine down had been easy enough, he left a bloody scent trail so obvious it might as well have had signs pointing to him. And happily my countermeasures for Sanguine had worked perfectly. Control over blood was quite powerful when your opponents had blood. But I had temporarily replaced mine with a saline solution and micro-unit mixture. To replace the functions blood would normally perform. I found it strange that his power required a specific mixture of cells and plasma. But as I was quickly coming to realize, powers rarely seem to have completely logical rules. Power thus neutralized. He hadn't put up much of a fight. Even with his blood power reinforcing his frail body. It hadn't held up to my assault. I wonder what was wrong with him. Many of his organs showed signs of fatigue. And cell production had been substandard. Eating him hadn't revealed a direct cause. Or anything of importance at all for that matter. No physical mechanism to move the blood. No brain anomalies. Nothing about the composition of his blood was unusual in any way. I had done a thorough analysis. But there was nothing to copy or steal. Disappointment. But at the very least it confirmed my theory. Powers were non-replicable. I had been able to consume some of the yellow fur. And all of the vigilante and sanguine. And a few bits of Frankie. Nothing learned. True. The lunch special back at the Redfin had given me usable designs. But I suspected this was merely a result of its exotic base anatomy. And not a facet of its power activation. No. If I was going to copy more useful codes and designs, then I would need to target mutants and animals. I needed to learn more about Mutavis. As for how to go about that, hunting down mutants was probably a bad idea. Far too many risks with that option. And Hellions' henchmen seemed to be very mutant-friendly besides. I wouldn't want to become at odds with my own faction. Poking holes into normal humans would probably fare even worse. All the same risks. Plus the added chance of causing a hazardous trigger, as this incident with the acid woman proved. If I decided to try forcing mutations, I would definitely need to wait until after Odd Summer had ended. So for now, electronic research would have to do. I used my phone to pull up the wiki page for Mutavis. While I had read it top to bottom already, I was hoping some of the links could bring me to a more detailed description of Mutavis's physical characteristics. The wiki mostly had historical information. And information on prevention and treatment. Neither of which I was all that interested in. Why would one want to prevent a mutation anyways? As far as I had seen, mutations were largely beneficial. True. Powers seemed to be much more effective. But despite Odd Summer they were still rare. I considered a mutation an excellent alternative. Just another oddity of humans, I guess. Hey kid, sorry. But I won't drive any farther than this. I was pulled from my musings by the taxi driver. He was a short man with a large mustache. Wearing a bullet-resistant vest and blast helmet similar to those used by Hellions' henchmen, except his were in yellow. Like his taxi. And he seemed very anxious. He flinched at every sudden movement. Held the steering wheel in a vice grip with both hands. And his eyes scanned the areas beyond the windows while he chewed on an unlit cigarette. Whenever a pedestrian came into view his right hand would flinch towards a shotgun he had mounted in his passenger seat. Apparently taxi drivers were allowed to carry guns. What's wrong? I asked him. Up ahead is Hellion territory, dead center. I ain't driving into that this late. You sure this is where you need? Yes. I live a few blocks from here. Christ. It's fine. I can make my own way from here. Your funeral, kid. The taxi cab had a reinforced barrier between the front seat and the back seats, with a payment device mounted on it. I inserted my chit and paid the man. Then exited the vehicle. The taxi sped away the moment the door was closed. I understood his reluctance to enter a verified villain's territory right now. Originally I had planned to take the bus. But it had zoomed past the bus stop while on fire, but without any passengers, or a driver. On the way back to Ashwood St. I had also spotted other incidents. Such as a small rat swarm being contained by police. And a building which had somehow been turned upside down while staying perfectly connected to the surrounding bridges, that had hurt to look at. It seemed Odd Summer was in full effect. I started in the direction of the apartment building. And as I walked, quickly noted several humans and mutants who were loitering about, glaring or sneering in my direction. Their attitudes changed entirely when I pulled out my mask and put it on. Groups of loiterers practically melted out of my path. And instead of threatening glances they avoided eye contact. Or gave brief nods which were a human sign of recognition. And I was told. Respect. From what had been explained to me, these weren't official members of Hellions' henchmen, but instead were local non-powered gangs. Cowl groupies. Or even civilians who held allegiance to Hellion. Or simply held hostility for Hellion's enemies. Wearing a Hellion's henchman mask in this area was basically a free pass. And if Pebbles was to be believed, my willingness to don my minion mask in public, and in full view of people, was worth street cred. Hopefully cred was like chits. My funds were low. And the taxi had been expensive. I made it back to the apartment building without further incident. And I used a side entrance, with a lockable entryway room for taking off masks, to enter the building itself. Then up a few stairs. And swipe my keycard on the door lock. And I was in my apartment. My apartment. Huh. Felt kinda nice actually. Guess there really was something to this after all. The tunnel had been mine. But only in the sense that I used it to sleep. And no other humans had used it to travel while I was squatting there. I entered the bedroom and sat on the bed, scanning through the websites I had pulled up on my phone. I was having a frustratingly hard time finding anything at all on the physical properties of the Mutavis virus. Almost all hard data was concentrated on recorded mutation rates, or symptoms and treatment, or on the history of its spread. But there was only speculation and theory on the actual vector of infection, or the physical makeup of the virus itself. Apparently the only way to know if you were infected was to actually suffer a mortal wound and start mutating. Otherwise the virus was completely dormant, and invisible to attempts to locate it. Once the mutation began to occur, samples could be collected from the affected individual. But there were problems with that as well. After the metamorphic process was complete, the virus went back to a state of dormancy. And what samples scientists and doctors collected during were fragile, and broke down quickly. Plus, there seemed to be a wide range of differences between samples based upon the types of physical alterations occurring. The most interesting article I read detailed samples taken from a rare mutation that had granted extensive regenerative properties to the recipient, but had left their outer characteristics largely unchanged. It was thought by scientists that if they could cultivate that strand of Mutavis, and purposely expose people to it, they could give people a beneficial mutation that didn't alter appearance, and therefore made them immune to less desirable mutations. The samples were injected into several volunteers, most of whom died from cancer several months later. 2 got away with nothing at all happening. And 1 volunteer mutated so badly they were forced to euthanize him, his mutation forcing him to attack and eat other humans, or suffer ever more mutation. Obviously the virus was more complicated than the humans understood. I wonder if that's why my micro-units self-destruct without a core signal. Without me directing them, I could definitely see them causing problems. I was a bit disappointed with how little information the humans had. It was somewhat understandable though. Mutavis had first started showing up about 60 years ago or so according to these reports, but only became a worldwide problem in the last 2 decades. Considering even I hadn't been able to detect dormant Mutavis, it was unfair to expect more from the humans in such a short time frame. They had to focus on real problems like odd summer after all. I just have to do the research myself. Or maybe Jasper would know more on the topic. But that could wait for tomorrow. I settled into sleep. It felt good to have accomplished so much in a single 24-hour period. A bullet defense acquired. Information source secured. The biggest threat to my position in a strong faction eliminated. And a location where I could practice cooking. Yep. Today had been a good day. I rested my head on the pillow and covered myself with the blanket. Time to give this bed thing a try. It was too soft and my weight made me sink too deep into the mattress and if I had to react fast. The mattress and sheets provided poor traction. This wouldn't do. I got out of the bed and looked it over again, before deciding to crawl under it. Ah! Much better. I woke early the next morning and headed over to the elevator hidden in the apartment building. This one required both a keycard and mask to access. Upon arrival at the base, I headed straight to the large main chamber to get breakfast, while Sandra had been lecturing me about groceries and proper nutrition. She had also let this little nugget of information slip past: the Hellions Henchman cafeteria served a complimentary breakfast if you came early. I wonder why no one told me about it. I grabbed a few muffins and a pot of coffee and sat down at a table to eat. A few minions wandered by with their own breakfasts and said good morning. But when I noticed Mikey coming from the elevator hallway, I waved for him to join me. I hadn't seen him since Monday, and I had a lot of stuff to talk to him about. He wandered over when he noticed me waving. Yawned. Mornin', Tofu. Got enough muffins there? No. But I was told you aren't supposed to hog them. Here. Have one. I graciously handed over a chocolate chip muffin. But not a lemon poppy seed one. Those ones were mine. We talked about stuff that had happened over the past 2 days. I let Mikey know, in no uncertain terms, that missing the company dinner had been a mistake. Missing good free food was simply irresponsible. And then I gave him a retelling of my activities yesterday, minus my removal of Sanguine. Mikey had apparently been working with other Black Mask minions yesterday, setting up network devices for Socket. And we discovered that we were both scheduled to go out and set up more network devices. Unfortunately, when I mentioned trying to get to level 5 in Griblin Tamer, Mikey revealed that he didn't play that game and didn't know the secret to advance. Darn. We finished up breakfast shortly after, and I returned the empty pot of coffee. Tofu. Where are you going? Garage is this way, said Mikey. Morning training with Adder. I didn't get to yesterday. The job starts in like an hour, which gives us an hour to train. Are you not coming? Eh? Come on, Mikey. You can't miss both food and training. They're important. Seriously now. And Sandra complained that I did dangerous things. I cajoled Mikey to the gym. And for the rest of the hour we trained with Adder and other minions until it was time for the job to start. It was a good thing too. Mikey's combat training was definitely lacking. Just what exactly were those human schools doing once done with training? We met up with Rattleback in the garage for instructions. Apparently my main job would simply be to stay in the van and act as a reserve in case of a situation that required a power user. The non-powered minions would handle setting up the devices that Socket needed for his network. And then Mikey, Brilla and Fred from Team 3, Tedic, one of the newbies who hadn't quit, and I, all piled into the van with a stack of Socket's devices. And then the strangest thing happened. We had a completely relaxing and uneventful day. We traveled around the northern section of E13, where most of the building alterations were. Every now and then we stopped, and the minions would take one of the devices and install it somewhere innocuous. Other than that, we met one of the local gangs, dodged a few police, and we got to talk with the superhero Brick, which was neat. But there wasn't any fighting, and nothing tried to kill me. It was weird, but nice. Bing. Bong. The sliding glass doors opened, and I entered the grocery. I loved the air in here. It was cool and crisp, and smelled of many different foods. Everywhere were shelves of food, in boxes, bags, and metal cans. Everything was labeled with its own symbols. And the prices were clearly displayed. There were even bags of raw sugar if you wanted to buy them. Food. Language. Numbers. And little carts that you could use to transport stuff. It was like humans had decided to take all the good things they had created and put them all in the same place. The only way it could be better would be if they threw in a few arcade training simulators. I grabbed one of the carts and headed towards the aisles. My main paycheck for the job on Sunday had come in, a happy surprise after today's work. So I had plenty of money. But I planned to take Sandra's advice and target only the specific food items I would need. Buns. Tofu patties. Ketchup. Sugar. Cheese substitute. I picked these and other items and placed them into my cart, slowly making my way down a list of ingredients that I would need to make a recipe I had downloaded. I was planning to try my hand at making tofu burgers. It undoubtedly would not be the same quality as Maggie's. But I needed practice. And if I was going to start somewhere, tofu burgers were my preferred option. I finished gathering my ingredients and headed for the checkout counter. I was third in line behind two other humans. The one in front of me in a large coat. A good thing too. I had scouted the grocery yesterday. But I hadn't yet used the weird moving counter where you placed the food. So I could use being third to make sure I did this correctly. Take a rubber divider. Place it down. Start placing food. Put the money in the bag and no one gets hurt. Estimated threat, low. I was stunned. After the first customer had walked away with their items, the second human in line had pulled out a handgun and pointed it at the cashier. I couldn't believe how stupid this human was. Didn't he know where we were? We were in the heart of Hellions territory. Even the cashier looked dumbfounded at the audacity. Sigh. Should I call the police? Probably not, right? Ifrit said the stores near the apartments paid Hellion. Did that mean I had to step in? But technically I was a civilian right now. I didn't want to make the wrong choice and make trouble for Sandra again. While I pondered whether or not I needed to use a mask, the cashier went about opening the register. And then, beep, pressed a button. The floor underneath the robber opened up. And he fell into a black pit, of which I couldn't see the bottom. The cashier yelled taunts and curses down the hole at the would-be robber, until the opening closed back up. I couldn't even see a seam where the robber had fallen through. Sorry about that. Happen sometime. Here. Have some gum for trouble. Then he added a small pink packet to my items before ringing up the rest of them. I paid him. And thanked him for the gum. Then I made my way out of the store, being careful to avoid the spot on the floor that had opened up, and rushed back to my apartment. I was simply not in the mood for more surprises. I had cooking to do. But it was only after I got back to the apartment and assembled my ingredients that I realized I had forgotten something rather important. Dang it. A note from Goggles Bear. Will Tofu be able to cook in peace? Will the secrets of Mutavis be revealed? Will the author ever be able to catch back up to his schedule? Find out next time on Super Minion Z. Side dish number 3. Pseudomonas benedicti, also known as benedicti, is a symbiotic bacteria found in humans and several other animal species. Believed to be a highly advanced evolution or mutation of probiotic bacteria. Benedicti is most famous for its beneficial relationship with its host. Unlike other diseases, Benedicti regulates itself to not cause harm to its host, and increases the effectiveness of several bodily functions, primarily the immune system. The effectiveness of this improvement varies between individuals, and is commonly referred to as a Benedicti reaction. The bacteria is transmitted in conditions similar to the common cold. i.e., airborne droplets, aerosols, direct contact with infected nasal secretions, or fomites, contaminated objects. Upon successfully transmitting to a new host, the bacteria begins to intentionally attract the immune system. At this point, the host may develop cold-like symptoms that dissipate over the next 24 hours as the host and bacteria acclimate to each other. This process is nearly always guaranteed, however. In rare cases, the host's immune system may never accept the bacteria and instead may attempt to eliminate it as a normal infection. Reapplication of a different strand of Benedicti can sometimes overcome this issue. The rate of transmission and acclimation of Benedicti increases during odd summer, giving credence to the theory that it is a powered disease. Once accepted by the host's immune system, the bacteria incubates and gathers at key organs within the host, the brain, primarily amygdala, heart, lungs, liver, and kidneys. When an injury or infection by other diseases occurs, the Benedicti clusters will release Benedicti cells into the bloodstream, which will coordinate with white blood cells to eliminate harmful diseases. In addition to supplementing the immune system, Benedicti can also help several other bodily functions, such as clearing out toxins or harmful drugs, and slowing blood flow to open wounds. As a result, hosts of Benedicti rarely succumb to shock. In about 10% of cases, Benedicti will synergize with its host more than normal, providing enhancements in other bodily systems. This is commonly known as a good reaction, or high reaction. The opposite, such as when the body rejects Benedicti, is known as a bad reaction, and happens in less than 1% of cases. Good reactions can sometimes be so strong that they mimic powers. Examples include increased reaction speed, and wounds that close so quickly you can view the healing process with the naked eye. However, these extremes are very rare. Benedicti was first found in a town called Last Stop near the Alaskan barrier wall. It came to the attention of heroes who were tracking down spreading outbreaks of mutavis, believed to have originated from a breach in the wall during odd summer a year prior. While most communities nearest the wall had fully succumbed to mutavis, many citizens in the town of Last Stop had proven resistant to mutation, appearing fully human. An analysis of the unafflicted individuals showed that they hosted a previously unknown bacteria, named later as Benedicti. It was then decided by heroes at the scene to spread Benedicti to communities around mutavis outbreaks to try and contain its spread. While containment measures ultimately failed, Benedicti is still a recognized preventative measure for mutavis, and its use is credited with preventing millions of mutations across the globe. Next time you turn in an essay late, at least refrain from parroting the wiki to me. See me after class. Mr. K. Mikey woke up at 6:30 a.m. And for a second the thought that he was late for school had him struggling to escape his tangled blankets. Then he remembered that school was over. Had been over since Friday. And he collapsed back into the mattress. He wouldn't even need to be at work until 10. Evil minion hours were surprisingly reasonable. Mikey froze. That thought was like a cold splash of water, ruining any chance of going back to sleep. He was a minion. And honest to God. Load the money. Lower the hero into a vat full of lava minion. How had he ever thought this was a good idea? The explosion. The hostages. Turbo showing up to stop them. It was insane. True, he had signed up for it and attended the orientation. But it hadn't felt real until the job on Sunday. That had been what really hammered it home for Mikey. Not for the first time. He wondered if that was kind of the point. Deciding he wouldn't be able to get back to sleep, he kicked off the tangled knot of covers and went about dressing himself. Dark jeans and a shirt with no identifiable marks was all it took to be ready for the day. Hellions' henchman didn't really have a uniform per se. But he had been advised that clothing with no real markings and that avoided bright colors was the recommended. That and the mask. Mikey's eyes drifted to the little black wristband sitting on his desk. It unfolded into a standard domino mask easily as long as you knew how to twist it correctly. Ha! Standard. Somehow it contained a simple communication system. An onboard map of E13. And lens to protect the eyes. All inside a tiny cloth band that matched the current fashion trends. The unassuming piece of tech was probably the most expensive thing Mikey owned. And the lady who had given it to him had grabbed it out of a box containing dozens more. He grabbed the wristband and put it on before he forgot it. Then he wandered into the kitchen. And turned on the small TV. To the news while he put together some cereal using the last of the powdered milk. It seemed odd summer was definitely gearing up. The newscasters didn't even bother trying to list everything going on. Simply talking about politics. Or covering the new hero announcements. While a list of the worst affected sectors scrolled in the background. Not too bad actually. The east and west sectors usually got the worst of it. But today only S8, S9, and SW8 were under alert. With only NW5 under a lockdown warning. All of it well away from E13. It wouldn't last forever though. The casual bets of E13's residents were never on whether or not E13 would see some shit. They bet on when it did happen. Would it be bad enough to cause a lockdown? Or if it would be caused by some bad trigger. Or a monster. Or maybe a fight with the local villains. Like Hellion. Mikey grimaced at the errant thought. It wasn't a big deal. Like the lady had said. He could make the money he needed. Then quit. A few days of grunt work. And then he could pay for college. Get a degree or certification or something. Get a legit job. And never mention this summer again. All he had to do for now was keep his head down. No big deal. Having lost his appetite for the cold cereal, he dumped the rest of the bowl in the sink. And headed out the door. He still had plenty of time before today's job started, just placing devices for Hellion's tinker again. Thank God. But with nothing better to do. He headed in the direction of the local gym which hid the secret elevator. That had been another surprise to Mikey. Secret entrances. Underground bases. Sure, people knew there might be a lair here or there. But Hellion's tunnels were extensive. For most of his life Hellion's henchmen had been that local gang in the background. You saw the graffiti tags. Or the odd person in a minion mask near the more disreputable areas. But the realization that Hellion's henchman was such a large player in the cowl community shocked Mikey. The past few days felt like he had sneaked a peek behind a theater curtain. Only to discover Atlantis behind it. A super-secret evil villain organization practically under his house. Tim would have gone nuts to learn about it all. Mikey grimaced at the thought. Tim could never learn about this. He was the brother Mikey never had. But he was also as straight a shooter as they came. And a hero fanatic to boot. Mikey could only imagine Tim's disappointment if he found out. Mikey shook the thought away as he entered the secret passage into the elevator and donned the minion mask. Tim wouldn't find out. Mikey would earn enough money for college. Quit. And then he'd be able to stop lying to his best friend. The elevator ride was smooth as normal. Entirely at odds with Mikey's tumultuous inner thoughts. Finally it stopped. And Mikey exited into the corridor that housed the multitude of elevators. It always felt like he was sneaking in for some reason. A bit magnified this time as he realized he really did have a lot of time before today's job actually started. Perhaps he should have tried harder to get back to sleep. He exited the elevator corridor into the large main chamber. and wandered in the direction of the garage. When he noticed a minion in a white mask waving at him, he tensed for a second, but relaxed immediately when he realized it was Tofu, and then chuckled as he walked over. Tofu was sitting at one of the tables with a small pile of muffins in front of him and his cell phone out. Somehow utterly relaxed despite being surrounded by other minions eating breakfast. Quite a few of them wearing the bone-white masks that marked them as being powered. He'd only known him a week or so. But Tofu just had this way of derailing serious situations that made him easy to like. And he had become a fast friend. That and the whole getting Mikey's money back and finding him a job thing. Mikey owed him big time for that. Mikey sat and greeted Tofu, yawning as he did so. He really should have tried to sleep more. "Mornin', Tofu. Got enough muffins there?" "No. But I was told you aren't supposed to hog them." "Here. Have one." Tofu handed over a muffin. And Mikey was surprised to find he was feeling hungry again. While they ate, they talked about what had happened yesterday. Apparently Tofu had gone to the red zone, snuck into an Espada hideout, and rescued some guy named Jasper from the supervillain Sanguine. Completely crazy. And yet Tofu had spent a mere 5 minutes retelling that adventure, glossing over most of the details. And then went on to tell Mikey about the company dinner in excruciating detail for nearly a half hour. That and a game on his phone called Gremlin Tamer. "Would you happen to know how to get past level 5? "Nah. I'm not too big on mobile games." "Dang. And Viper wouldn't tell me either." "I'll ask Nicole later then." "Why don't you just look it up?" "Nicole said only cheaters do that. And asking others isn't cheating." "No. It's teamwork." Mikey laughed. Tofu was definitely an odd guy. But he was a good one. They talked a bit longer. And Mikey was immensely glad to find out Tofu was on the same job crew today. But eventually they finished up and made to head out. Unexpectedly, Tofu headed in the direction of the gym. "Tofu. Where are you going? Garage is this way. Morning training with Adder. I didn't get to yesterday. The job starts in like an hour. Which gives us an hour to train. Are you not coming?" Mikey remembered getting the stuffing knocked out of him during orientation. And he wasn't exactly eager to repeat the experience. "Come on, Mikey. You can't miss both food and training. They're important," said Tofu. Mikey let himself get dragged to the gym. And an hour later he was reconsidering whether Tofu was really a nice guy. Adder's workout regime was brutal. Or at least more than he had ever wanted to do in the morning. By the end of the hour, he felt like he had done more exercise than in every PE class put together. And Tofu hadn't even broken a sweat despite getting tossed around the practice mat by Adder. "Damn exercise addicts," he grumbled half-heartedly. And rinsed his head under a faucet in the bathroom before heading to the garage with Tofu. There they found Fred and Brilla, minus hangovers today, he noted. And another newbie called Teddick. "Finished a workout?" "Sure. Whatever you say, man." Mikey didn't much care for the guy. Yesterday Fred and Brilla had admitted to being hungover. And pulled seniority to have Mikey and Teddick do most of the heavy lifting while they set up the electronics. Teddick had done some of his share of the work. Between talking about his experience in other gangs and how he was going to climb the ranks. With a not-so-subtle implication that Mikey should get into his good graces while he could. "All right, guys. Same as yesterday. Load the truck and let's skedaddle," said Fred. This time helping to load the truck himself now that he was sans hangover. Tofu and Mikey chatted about the Gremlin game Tofu was trying to beat. And Mikey got a kick out of Teddick realizing he was already friends with Tofu. Teddick tried to join the small talk. but was woefully uninformed about games, or cooking, or any of the other topics that Tofu tended to rapidly switch to. And Mikey had to admit that watching Tedek try and fail to endear himself to Tofu was in no small amount cathartic after all his big talk yesterday. The last of the boxes got stored. They piled in. And they drove off for what Mikey hoped would be another uneventful day. The job was simple enough. Take the devices Socket had made, and install them in places where they wouldn't be noticed. Under mailboxes. On top of buildings. Some of the devices were even small enough to tape to the sides of buildings and spray paint over them so that they fit in with the years of old graffiti. Of course. In a few cases they had to check spots where devices had failed for one reason or another and try to recover them. Which was why Mikey had climbed up to a billboard to replace a real clunker of a gizmo. This one was really strapped tight for some reason. Zap, damn it. Mikey cursed a bit. That static had hurt for real. If it wasn't a battery leak or something. He hoped the gizmo wouldn't explode on him or something stupid. Yo Mikey, hurry it up already. Tedek yelled from below where he was keeping lookout. Gimme a sec. This one's finicky. He yelled back. Bleh. He wished for the 100th time that he had gone with a different nickname than his own. But he hadn't been thinking all that clearly when he was in the interview. He doubted he could have actually kept anything from an organization like Hellions anyways. But at least it would have kept idiots like Tedek from yelling it in public where anyone could hear. He searched through the bag of tools he had lugged up with him, and found a pair of heavy-duty gloves which he pulled from the bag. Then he got to work trying to unstrap the belts and fastenings keeping the device in place. Why the hell was this one so complicated? Some of Socket's devices were rather ambitious, one had been indistinguishable from a large blue mailbox. But this one was a bit strange. Most of Socket's stuff looked like it could have come off an assembly line. But this one looked like it had been hastily slapped together from dumpster parts. In fact, if Mikey didn't know any better he would think. Snap. Twang. One of the belts he had been trying to loosen snapped. And several metal braces and wires snapped together on his hand like a bear trap. Before the whole thing sparked to life. Mikey. What the hell happened? It was booby-trapped. My hand's stuck in it. Get up here and help me open this thing. Can't you open it? Not one-handed. Now get up here. I'll get the others. Be right back with help. Tedek yelled as he ran down the alley. Tedek. Tedek. God damn it. Mikey struggled with the trap before slumping and giving up. He didn't want to accidentally make it worse somehow. You never knew what surprises a gizmo might have for you. He settled in to wait for help. Hopefully they'd get here soon. Someone had set this trap. And none of the possibilities were good. A hero, unlikely given the type of trap. A vigilante. Some villain not associated with Hellion. A vigilante might just rough him up a bit. But if it was a villain. You alright, mister? Gah. Mikey jumped at the unexpected voice. And spun as best he could with his hand trapped to look at the source. It was a kid. A mutant kid. He was about 12 if Mikey had to guess. And had an extra pair of arms that stuck out of tears in the kid's shirt. The kid's overalls were weighed down with the weight of all the items in his pockets. Including a slingshot that stuck out of one. And for some reason he was wearing a pair of swimming goggles. Mikey gaped at the new arrival. Unsure what to make of him. Sure, he was just a kid. But it was odd summer right now. Mikey had forgotten about the fourth option of the trap just being set by some nutjob. Need any help? Asked the kid. I mean, if you can get this trap off my hand, said Mikey unsurely. Sure. No problem. $200. Mikey sputtered. Was this kid actually trying to shake him down? I seem to have left my wallet at home, kid. Spat Mikey. Aw. Oh well. Said the kid in a sad-sounding voice. Then he perked up. Oh. Neat bag. And before Mikey could stop him, the kid grabbed the bag of tools, pulling it out of his reach. Hey! Give that back! Yelled Mikey, straining to reach. I will. I will. Oh hey! A cold iron. I've always wanted one of those. And the kid stuffed the tool into a pocket before rummaging around the sack more. Mikey wrenched one of the looser metal bands away from his trapped hand, and strained for all he was worth. It took a few good pulls, but finally his hand slipped free from the glove, and he fell backwards away from the trap, and perilously close to the edge of the thin metal walkway meant for workers to service the billboard. He gasped and scrambled back from the edge in a hurry, trying to keep his heart from leaping out of his throat. Later, loser, came the young kid's voice. Mikey's head whipped in the direction it came from, only to see the kid leap from the metal walkway to a second-level bridge nearly 20 feet away. A leap that Mikey was sure he couldn't have made. The kid landed easily and ran for it, soon out of sight around a corner. He hadn't taken the bag of tools with him, but there was no telling how many he had stolen. Damn it. Ha ha ha, by a little kid, laughed Teddick, to Mikey's chagrin. If Teddick had actually been there, it wouldn't have happened. Mikey had met Teddick and Fred on the way back to the van, and Mikey had explained about the strange kid who had stolen his tools. Ah, don't feel too bad. We didn't bring any tools that are hard to replace, said Fred dismissively. And the kid was probably a member of the Tinker Tots. They operate in this area. The Tinker Tots? Asked Mikey, disbelievingly. Teddick went into a new round of laughter. Don't sound so surprised, said Fred. You know, all that weird architecture north of Ashwood St. They do most of that. They're also like half the reason we need to replace Socket's network devices so often. They steal them for parts. Mikey mulled that over for a while. They're really all tinkers. I thought that was rare. Probably only one or two of them are real tinkers. Just think of them as the local ragamuffins. They cause trouble, but it's nothing too serious. Why don't we just get rid of them? Asked Teddick. PFT. 'Cause they're a bunch of kids. That's why. What you want us to do? Blow them up? Besides, sometimes they're useful. They made their way back to the van, and drove to the next area to set up more devices. Although Teddick insisted on telling the story to Tofu and Brilla himself, to Mikey's annoyance. Are they a threat? Asked Tofu seriously, derailing Teddick's mirth. Nah. Just a bunch of brats, replied Brilla. Okay, confirmed Tofu. And he went back to fiddling with his phone. Mikey shivered in the sudden cold atmosphere the question had created. He was glad it had shut Teddick up. But the way Tofu asked reminded Mikey of how Tofu had handled almost killing his mother's boyfriend. Mechanically. Hold on back there, yelled Brilla, as she wrenched the steering wheel and sent them careening into a tight alleyway, just barely making the fit. Behind them a cop car screeched right before it hit the corner of one of the enclosing buildings, as it hadn't been at a good enough angle to copy the maneuver. The van full of minions burst through the alley at the opposite end, and quickly, and at a safer speed, headed down the street and into more labyrinth alleyways to make sure they had lost the cop car. See, easy peasy, said Brilla. Mikey wasn't too sure about that. Brilla had been swearing up a storm not 2 seconds before they ditched the cop car. And Fred had a white-knuckle death grip on the overhead handle. Mikey wasn't feeling too disgruntled. But he had distracted himself by keeping the boxes of Tinker devices from bouncing around the van. Tofu was his usual unflappable self. And Tedek had his head between his knees as he muttered prayers beneath his breath. "What now?" asked Tofu. "Now we continue to the next spot." Same ol', answered Brilla. Tedek groaned. And Mikey suppressed one himself. He was ready to be done for the day. "We can get lunch afterwards," Fred offered. "Feeling a bit peckish myself." They drove to the next spot. And left Tofu to guard the van while they split into pairs to place the final few devices. Luckily Mikey was paired with Fred this time. Fred navigated up to the second level. And they slapped thin devices disguised as yard sale posters to out-of-the-way walls as they went. But there was a small surprise waiting for them as they came to a makeshift bridge that had been set up where the original architecture had been destroyed. It was a metal and wire affair that seemed solid enough. But it was blocked by a short barricade that had been set up, complete with a miniature toll booth to the side that was manned by a kid in a fake police getup. $10 to cross the bridge," said the kid. Mikey raised an eyebrow. And Fred just laughed before saying, "Nice try, kid. But Fortress City doesn't have toll booths." "Well, this bridge doesn't belong to the city. We made it. $20 to cross." Fred rolled his eyes and said, "Yeah. I think we'll pass on your death trap," and gestured for Mikey to follow him. They headed back the way they had come. But were surprised to run into another barricade. It had been rolled into place behind them, complete with its own little toll booth and another ragamuffin to man it. "Toll is $50, said the young kid. "Ha. Ha. Very funny kids. But we've got real work to do," said Fred. And he stepped over the barrier. "Hey. You can't do that," said the tiny toll officer. Mikey followed Fred over the barrier. And they got about 20 feet before something whizzed by and hit Fred in the head. "That's what you get, you jerks," yelled another voice. One Mikey recognized. It was the four-armed kid that had taken his tools. The kid was standing back behind the barricade with the toll booth operator. "Hey! That's the brat who stole the tools," Mikey exclaimed. "Really, Ann? Hey, look. My patience for kids just reached its end," said Fred. Scowling, he approached the barrier. And the four-armed thief pulled the smaller kid back. But that wasn't Fred's aim. He walked over to the miniature toll booth and kicked it, denting the side. "Hey!" yelled the kids. But Fred ignored them and continued to destroy the toll booth. The four-armed kid with the slingshot started taking more shots at Fred, which only prompted Mikey to help Fred trash the kid's little business venture faster. He did feel a bit bad when the toll booth operator started crying. But it was fair comeuppance as far as he was concerned. The trashing of the barricade continued until suddenly the kid scattered. And Mikey had just enough time to wonder why before a deep voice spoke behind them. "Well, I'll be. Have Hellion's henchmen sunk to bullying kids now, for shame?" Mikey turned around and froze. He knew the man before him. It was hard not to. Brick could be seen on the local news all the time, usually beating up two-story monsters with his fists. He was one of the supers that didn't bother with a full suit. Just camo pants, a tank top, and a blue mask that only covered the top half of his face. Brick looked smaller in person than Mikey expected. But he knew that was just an optical illusion from normally seeing Brick 10 feet tall and beating up evildoers with his power on. Mikey was in so much shit. "Stay calm," whispered Fred. Then he raised his voice and addressed the hero. "Hello, officer. Can we help you with something?" "Yeah. I came here on a report that some kids were running an illegal racket. Glad to see I can arrest some real criminals instead of wasting my time lecturing kids. Don't know what you mean. We haven't. Save it. You're wearing masks at the scene of a crime. And we both know I need less than that to haul you in. We're all gonna take a little walk down to street level and wait for the good police officers to come pick you up. Unless you'd like to try running. Fred didn't respond. Instead, just dropping the bag of devices he'd been carrying and putting his hands up. Mikey followed suit. And Brick picked up the bag before having them walk in front of him. Soon they were at street level where Brick had them sit on the curb. Mikey was mortified. He was getting arrested by a hero he had cheered for multiple times in the past. And now Tim was going to find out he'd been arrested for henching. Unless Hellion's promises of lawyer support were real. He really hoped the lawyers were real. You know. We really weren't doing anything. Those kids actually stole from us. Mikey hesitantly ventured. Brick snorted. You must be new. Let me tell you the same advice I tell all you minions. Get out. Before I have to kick you out. Mikey shut up, it had been worth a shot, right? And sat contemplating his fate. He expected a police cruiser to show up any second now. Which was why he was really confused when a black van pulled up instead. And Tofu stuck his head out the window. Hey guys. We've been looking all over for you. Said Tofu. Mikey gaped at Tofu. Was he just seeing things? Nope. Fred was goggling too. And Brick was already growing as his power took hold. Holy shit, he's big. Step out of the van and put your hands up. Only warning. Yelled Brick. The sliding side door of the van opened. And Brick tensed for a fight. Only to freeze at the sight of the occupant. Out stepped the four-armed kid who had been causing trouble for the minions. The kid looked around with wide eyes before running to Brick and hiding behind him. He was trying to steal more stuff from us. Said Tofu. You should arrest him. Brick glanced down at the kid. Who stuttered. ISS stole their S stuff. It was my fault. Sorry. Brick looked back up at Tofu. Be that as it may. When the patrol shows up, you are all coming to the station on suspicion of henching. But we were going to get lunch. Apparently Brick didn't know how to react to that any more than the rest of the minions. Which meant the awkward silence was only broken when the police patrol vehicle blazed down the street while on fire. Everyone stared at it as it passed. I've been noticing that a lot lately. Said Tofu. Mikey made it home after what felt like forever. He was sore. Tired. And with more than one bruise to both his body and ego. Brick had given up on arresting them. Apparently deciding that getting the kid away from the strange-powered minion. And coordinating with the efforts to stop the flaming squad car. Was more important than arresting some minions that had allegedly done nothing wrong. Fred and Brilla called off the rest of the job after that debacle. And they had limped themselves to a mega burger for Tofu before calling it quits. Mikey had been tempted to hand in his notice and call the entire thing quits. This had been such a close call. But upon arriving back at the base, there had been a paycheck waiting for him. A fat paycheck. With more than 2 zeros. His emotions and logic warred over his sudden riches. When finally his brain gave up. And he decided to shove the decision to another day. Mikey dragged himself home not soon after. Collapsing into bed and falling dead asleep. It was several hours later when he woke. It was still evening. And Mikey could have slept longer easily. But his phone was ringing. He grabbed it to turn it off. But the caller ID stopped him. It was Tofu. Hesitantly he answered it. Hello. Hey Mikey. Hey Tofu, everything alright? Sorta. I tried to cook some tofu burgers. But I didn't have any pans. So I tried to use my hands and that didn't work. And now my stove is on fire. Would you happen to have a frying pan I can borrow? I'll be over in a bit. A note from Goggles Bear. The answers to last week's trivia are: spoiler, spoiler. Eventually. Maybe someday. And probably not. Ingredients, glossary. A note from Goggles Bear. Real chapter will be up in a bit. This is just a glossary of characters, written from Tofu's perspective. So there's a few tidbits if you feel like reading it. Tofu, myself. Fusion of biomechanical core unit with organic cell structures. Micro units provide variability of form. Human.exe provides advanced combat/social problem solving abilities. Human.exe integration going well. Hellion's henchman. Hellion, mask is red-horned helm with transparent golden faceplate. Boss of Hellion's henchman. Flame powers, assumed pyrokinetic. Explosions. Do not anger. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 0.012%. Imp, mask is red-powered minion helmet with 2 small horns. Teleporter. Short range. Can teleport self and small objects. Uses handguns. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 37.3%. Socket, mask is Tinker goggles with various attachments. Tinker. Makes elevators. Masks. Focus on fabrication strange accent. Combat potential unclear, Tinker designation. Estimate chance of confrontation survival using known factors, 89.5%. Sandra, Hellion's henchman HR department head. Handles legal issues. Strangely perceptive. Seems protective of younger employees, note, maintain young age persona. Estimate chance of confrontation survival, 100%. Adder, mask is standard minion black domino mask. Hellion's henchman melee combat trainer. No power detected. Does not hench. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 99%. Estimated chance of winning spar, 1.45%. Rattleback, mask is standard minion black domino mask. Hellion's henchman quartermaster. Manages equipment for minions. Values efficiency and lack of waste. No power use detected. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 62%. Accounting for potential explosive weaponry. Viper, mask is standard minion black domino mask. Real name Lily. Mutant. Scaled hands with sharp claws. Scales extend up forearms. Shoulders. Neck. To sides of head. Has embedded metal, piercings, combat weakness. Works with Sandra in HR department. Likes rectangular, cell phone, combat weakness. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 96%. Smoke, mask is gray-powered minion mask with tinted faceplate. Impression of human skull. Powers unknown. Combat potential unknown. Appears to be faded and shadowed. Note, ask Tim about shadow powers. Always seen with Hellion. Threat estimate, high. New hires. Ifrit, mask is standard minion bone white helmet mask. Real name Cindy. Mutant. Wears red metal gauntlets. Shoots explosive fireballs from hands. Mutant ability or aspect of gauntlets unclear. Peripheral modifications, second set of transparent eyelids. Fireproof chemical in sweat. Raspy voice, aspect of mutation. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 52%, warning, Ifrit is offspring of Hellion. Do not engage. Olsen, mask is standard minion bone white helmet mask. Previously worked for Hellion. Wears red shirts. Power returns him to life uninjured upon death, jealousy. Assume offensive capabilities equal to normal human. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 100%. Gregor, mask is standard minion bone white helmet mask. Mutant. 8 feet tall. With green scales encasing entire body. Above average human strength. Claimed to be knife-proof, note, acquire sample when possible. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 98%. Team 3. Pebbles, mask is standard minion bone white helmet mask. Mutant. Has metallic platelets embedded in skin/flesh at key points. Providing reinforcement. Resistant to blunt force trauma. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 98%. Buzzer, mask is standard minion bone white helmet mask. Sound-based power. Creates sonic vibrations. Can listen to sounds from a distance. Can detect quiet sounds. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 96%. Fred, mask is standard minion black domino mask. Standard male human. Bad at drinking. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 100%. Brilla, mask is standard minion black domino mask. Standard female human. Bad at drinking. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 100%. People I like social resources. Jasper P. Barnigan, entrepreneur of odd jobs and information broker extraordinaire. Mutant. Has 4 eyes, low light vision. Humanoid. But covered in green carapace. Seems to know everyone. And a little about everything. Taught me about lunch. Valuable source of information, prioritize his survival. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 110%. Nicole, mutant. Non-humanoid. Freely teaches information. Has no faction. Design matches organism designated, scorpion. Albeit heavily modified by Mutavis. Acid spit. Fast reflexes. Claws are strong. Practiced combat maneuvers. Valuable designs. But is source of free information and is possible ally, consume only if necessary, observe for chances to sample. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 37%. Mikey, human. Met at school. Shares food unprompted, prioritize his survival. Valuable social resource. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 100%. Tim, human. Met at school. Mikey's friend. Has extensive knowledge of superheroes and power gain. Valuable social resource, prioritize his survival. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 100%. Maggie, owner of Maggie's Sunrise Diner. Makes the best tofu burgers in E13 sector. Shares food unprompted, prioritize her survival. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 100%. Heroes. Brick, mask is blue half-face mask. Leader of E13 hero faction. Tall. Has super strength in addition to activatable combat mode, size increase. Appears to gain rock-like armor. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 15%. Magenta, mask is magenta half-face mask. Durable force field power. Capable of flight. Force field defends whole body. And can shift size and shape. But seems to be concentrated on hands. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 12%. Turbo, mask is gray head cover. Leaves mouth uncovered. Velocity/acceleration power. Can travel at speeds exceeding bullet velocities. Weakness, while strong for a normal human. Power does not grant strength. Hits for substantially less than mass times acceleration equation would suggest. Countermeasures successfully implemented. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 27%. The Guardian mask is small blue domino mask. Does not conceal identity. According to Tim Power is vector control. Capable of flight. And withstanding explosions. I owe him lunch. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 93%, documented evidence that the Guardian does not kill. Estimated chance of confrontation victory, 12%. Villains. The Merc mask is black. Covered face helmet. Powers unclear. Uses devices. Capable of flight. And shooting explosive fireballs from hands. Kill when feasible. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 6%. Sanguine, former high-ranking member of the Espada faction. Had the ability to control free-flowing blood. Both his and others. Weakness, required specific mix of blood cells and plasma. Deceased. Frankie, former low-ranking member of the Espada faction. Had the ability to create glowing green blades floating above his forearms. Blades vaporized solid matter. Cutting through most materials. Weakness, blades could not change shape or position. High-density objects slowed vaporization. And therefore cutting ability. Deceased. Acid Woman, name unknown. Former low-ranking member of the Espada faction. Power activated during confrontation. Had the ability to produce a high-quality acid which she was immune to. Dissolved upon death. Produced acid did not immediately disperse. Note to self, research, bad trigger. Deceased. New Dawn Inc., name of faction that created me. Strong faction. Highly competent and well-armed soldiers/henchmen. Estimated reaction to my escape from facility unknown, avoid. Dar. Mason, member of New Dawn Inc. Scientist. Leader of team that likely created me. Intelligent. Gives food unprompted. Gives good advice. May have knowledge of weaknesses, kill when feasible. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 100%. Brett Savvy, member of New Dawn Inc. Scientist who worked with Dr. Mason. Intelligent. Appeared to be highly involved in project. May have knowledge of weaknesses, kill when feasible. Estimated chance of confrontation survival, 100%. Darksiders, biker gang situated south of Ashwood St. Friendly and helpful. Notable members, Teddy. Tinker Tots, street urchin, gang. Situated north of Ashwood St. Concentrates activities on devices/gizmos/gadgets/money. Architectural modifications in area are a result of their activities. Members comprised predominantly of orphan children with mutant modifications or tinker abilities. Maggie's Sunrise Diner within their area of activity, maintain cordial relations.